Chapter 1430. Yu suddenly understood that it was only today that the stone pagoda had truly revealed everything to him. He coughed and covered up the strange light in his eyes. In a world of adults, there was a tacit understanding that didn't need to be said too clearly. So at this moment, Yu thanked the stone pagoda and pretended that he hadn't seen anything or guessed anything. The stone pagoda was deeply grateful for this. Although it had already prepared itself to be completely exposed to Yu's sight, it still didn't want to recall or face the events of the past. Crackle, crackle, light sounds rang out one after another. The layers of sticky film that wrapped around second senior apprentice brother's body began to break apart as the resentful souls vanished. The stone pagoda said, "Master, if there is nothing else, I will return first." Yu nodded. With a light hum, the stone pagoda phantom vanished from sight. With a stuffy cough, second senior apprentice brother opened his eyes. A sharp light surged within them, and a strong and wild aura broke out from his body. But soon, he realized the situation in front of him. He looked at Yu and frowned. Junior apprentice brother? A moment later, after learning the cause and effect of what had happened, second senior apprentice brother revealed a grateful expression. He cupped his hands together and said, "I must thank junior apprentice brother for helping me this time. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable." Yu glanced at second senior apprentice brother. Although his eyes were a bit dim, there was still a halo of light swirling in them. He could sense that there was something different in his aura. He smiled and said, "After surviving a calamity, senior apprentice brother seems to have obtained some harvests." Second senior apprentice brother didn't hide anything. He sighed and nodded. "That person in the wine pool, strictly speaking, has some origins with me. Through this matter, I was able to recover some of my forgotten memories. I should be able to break through my current boundaries soon." "Congratulations, second senior apprentice brother." Hunter Battles shook his head and bitterly smiled. "If it weren't for junior apprentice brother helping me, I fear I would have already died." He took a deep breath and cupped his hands together. "I will remember this matter. In the future, if junior apprentice brother needs me, this life is yours. Please don't hesitate to ask." His fists were firm and sincere. Yu smiled and didn't say anything. In truth, what he said before was correct. It was impossible for him to stay in Peach Blossom Garden forever. He even had a faint premonition that he would soon leave. Perhaps it was related to that woman's request. In short, he could help Peach Blossom Garden for a time, but he couldn't help them forever. The best result would be for everyone to become stronger. Let's go. White Phoenix, Iron Mountain, and Xiaoyu are waiting outside. I fear they are worried. Sure enough, when the two of them went out, the first two were still fine. They merely furrowed their brows and looked solemn, but Lei Xiaoyu was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. She could not help but pace back and forth. "Big Brother Qin." Lei Xiaoyu's eyes brightened as she saw them and walked over. Bai Feng and Tai Shan heaved a sigh of relief. However, a trace of hesitation quickly appeared in the depths of the former's eyes. "You, little junior brother, since you've come out safe and sound, you can return what I gave you earlier." Bai Feng smiled and extended her hand. "You," and she, and said, "He, I, he, I, he. He smiled and said, "Third brother didn't give me anything, so don't worry. It's really me and second brother who came out." She, Quan, it's good that you're fine. It's good that you're fine. After pausing for a moment, he continued, "Because I'm not very clear about the specific situation of the wine cellar, I did not say much about it in order to prevent junior brother from making a mistake. I hope junior brother will not blame me for my lack of clarity." Yu waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. Second senior brother revealed a trace of embarrassment. He took a deep breath and said, "I was tricked by that person in the wine cellar. It was all thanks to junior brother's help. Otherwise, I might not have been able to return." Even though he had said it very simply, the meaning behind his words was enough to make one's heart tremble. Shock immediately appeared in the eyes of the other party. Yu thought that his second senior brother was quite honest. He met their gazes and nodded. "He is a bit of a threat, but after experiencing the tribulation this time, I believe that second senior brother will soon break through. The Peach Garden will have another saint. This was good news, especially after the previous turmoil. For the disciples of the Peach Blossom Garden, every additional saint was an additional layer of protection. Congratulations, second senior brother. Bai Feng, Tai Shan, and Lei Xiaoyu were overjoyed. Bai Zhan Yuyi couldn't help but reveal a smile. He suddenly thought of something and looked at Qin Yu. Almost forgot. How is junior apprentice Sister Peach? Qin Yu said, her situation has stabilized. As he spoke, his eyes fell on Lei Xiaoyu. Everything else was left to her. Lei Xiaoyu said, fourth senior apprentice sister is doing very well. It's just that her temperament has become a bit colder. She almost never speaks to anyone. In truth, this was already a tactful way of describing things. Not only had Peach Blossom's temperament become colder, but she was like a block of ice, filled with an icy coldness that no one dared to approach. Qin Yu faintly sensed that she was hiding something. He furrowed his eyebrows and said, in a moment, come with me to take a look. Bai Zhan Yuyi nodded. With junior brother here, I can rest assured. I will go into seclusion for a period of time and strive to make a breakthrough as soon as possible. He was the first to leave. Bai Feng was currently in charge of all the affairs of the Peach Blossom Garden and was also incomparably busy. She and Tai Shan hurriedly bid their farewells. Qin Yu watched them leave. Then, he glanced at Lei Xiaoyu. Tell me the truth. Lei Xiaoyu bitterly smiled. Big brother Qin, even if you didn't say anything, I would have invited you to take a look. There really is something wrong with senior apprentice Sister Peach right now. As Qin Yu listened to her speak in detail, he frowned. But he subconsciously let out a breath of relief in his heart. This was because, just as Lei Xiaoyu said, there was indeed something wrong with Peach Blossom. But she didn't seem to have any inclination to commit suicide. Soon, Qin Yu realized that his thoughts were cruel and callous. But he couldn't deceive himself. He bitterly smiled and suppressed these thoughts. Let's go. Let's go and take a look. 3 days later, Qin Yu saw Peach Blossom again. When she swept her eyes over him, it was just as Lei Xiaoyu had said. It was like an icy knife ruthlessly sliced across his body. At the same time, there was also a bone-chilling coldness. However, her attitude towards Qin Yu was different from others. After a moment of silence, she gently nodded and said, Junior brother, you've come. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. I heard that senior apprentice sister's recovery was quite good, so I came to take a look. Peach Blossom said, I'm fine. For a time, Qin Yu found that he didn't know what to say. Even if he asked himself honestly, he could be considered someone skilled in the art of speech. Just as he was thinking about what to say that wouldn't touch Peach Maiden's nerves, she suddenly said, Junior apprentice brother, don't worry. Since I've agreed to be treated, I won't easily give up my life. He paused for a moment before continuing, I'm tired. I want to rest for a while. Little junior brother, you can go by yourself. Qin Yu bitterly smiled to himself. He had already made it clear that he was leaving. Then, he cupped his hands in acknowledgement and turned to leave. Lei Xiaoyu, who was following behind him, looked at him for a while before turning to look at the courtyard where Peach Maiden was. Her expression was extremely complicated. Qin Yu turned around and rapped her on the forehead. He angrily roared, What nonsense are you thinking about? Peach's current appearance has nothing to do with me. Halfway through his words, he suddenly lost his voice. As he said before, people couldn't lie to themselves. He flicked his sleeves and left, gritting his teeth as he said, In short, it's not what you think. Lei Xiaoyu chased after him. Big brother Qin, I will tell you everything about senior Sister Peach Maiden in the future. Wasn't this clearly relying on him? Everything he said just now had been in vain. Qin Yu resisted the urge to turn around and smack her on the forehead again. His face darkened as he quickened his pace. After shaking off Lei Xiaoyu, he returned to his dwelling. Qin Yu rubbed his temples, a bitter smile on his face. Peach Maiden's problem really was a problem. Although she didn't have any inclination to not want to live right now, she definitely wouldn't be able to remain in such a hopeless state for too long. But for the time being, Qin Yu really didn't have any good ideas. He could only temporarily suppress this thought and wait for a later opportunity to solve this problem. If he couldn't solve this problem right now, then he would deal with it later. Qin took a deep breath and calmed his thoughts. He stood up and walked toward the training room. Practice was the only standard for testing. In simpler terms, through the incident with that pitiful, resentful spirit in the exploding hammer wine cellar, Qin had determined just how formidable and mysterious an inheritance supernatural ability was. Moreover, he didn't know whether or not the so-called hidden dangers that the rulers will avatar spoke of were true. Even if it really did exist, Qin couldn't care about such things. Increasing his strength was his top priority right now. First, great changes had occurred in Vastyong. The ruler's situation of seclusion had likely changed, and this was the most pressing reason. Secondly, although he had smoothly killed the two sages, Zhou and Lin, and even scared off the ruler of a fallen country and the black-robed true sage with just his aura, it seemed that he was extremely awe-inspiring, intimidating all the enemies and stabilizing the situation in the Peach Garden. But no matter what, a grudge had already been formed. This was an indisputable fact. Would the influence behind Saint Zhou and Saint Lin, or perhaps that black-robed true saint, really give up like this? Of course, if they admitted defeat, that would be the best result. Qin wasn't a masochist, and he didn't think that he could rely on the strength of a single strike to defy the heavens, defy the earth, defy the air, and trample everyone beneath his feet. But he had to admit that if things were really as he thought, then there was likely a ruler hidden behind the shadows that truly overlooked Vastyong. If so, then the possibility of them admitting defeat was nearly negligible. In other words, revenge would definitely come. Moreover, once they were prepared, they only needed to attack to deal with Qin. The enemy was in the dark while he was in the light. Moreover, there was no way to hide. He was nothing more than a shining live target. This feeling was simply terrible. So now, deep in Qin heart, the desire to constantly become stronger was becoming increasingly intense. Cultivating in seclusion and perceiving the 5 great inheritance supernatural abilities, all of that was empty. Only having a sufficiently formidable strength was the most fundamental guarantee. And in truth, Qin didn't think too much about this. This was because as he hurriedly went into seclusion, revenge had already been put on the agenda. And the one who did all of this was the influence that the black-robed man represented. They had a very high-level name that also had a bit of style. The Dusk Order. Chapter 1431. The hall was filled with light. Every piece of glazed roof tile shone down, illuminating the figures on the 12 chairs very clearly. In the Haoyang world, the 12 divine thrones of the Dusk Order, which were hidden under the light and hidden from the eyes of the world, were gathered here. The black-robed, true saint who had been frightened away by Qin Yu's hand during the destruction of his country was one of the 12 divine thrones. At this time, he was silent, his expression cold. Deep in his eyes, there was anger and resentment constantly surging. The 12 divine thrones were arranged in a circle, forming a perfect circle. Naturally, there was no difference between them. At this time, a cold voice sounded out from underneath a black robe. What happened during the destruction of my country? The 7 divine thrones retreated without a fight, causing my Twilight Order to be defeated for the first time. He had been named. After a moment of silence, a cold and gloomy voice sounded out. The Peach Garden Knight Qin is hiding a great secret. Although I didn't fight him, I could feel the threat of death if I hadn't retreated that day. I might have died on the spot. The hall was silent. After several breaths of time, one of the divine thrones slowly said, when the 7 divine thrones attacked, they had a supreme treasure bestowed upon them by his honor. Unless someone on the level of his honor arrived, who could resist? Therefore, we cannot accept such an explanation. This was, of course, a more elegant way of saying it. The more direct explanation was, you must be hiding something. The 7 gods' seats' face twitched. He could feel the anger surging in his chest. However, he was not an impatient young man. He sneered and said in a deep voice, "If you don't believe me, you can personally go and test it out." This was clearly the most direct and effective method. The hall fell silent, as if they were choked by these words. The Peach Garden 9 Qin, you had killed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin on the spot. Even if the divine thrones were powerful, without his honor's treasure, they weren't confident they could contend with him. Rashly knocking on their door, rather than saying they were testing the truth, it was more like they were rushing thousands of miles to deliver their heads. Just as everyone was getting angry and thinking about whether they should join forces to teach the 7 god seats a lesson, a ball of light suddenly appeared in the ring-shaped space. At first, it was just a dot, but in the blink of an eye, it expanded to the size of a human head. The surface of the light gently moved, and a face appeared indistinctly. Everyone was slightly startled, and they hurriedly stood up and bowed. "Greetings, Your Honor." Within the Dusk Order, he was the only existence that stood above the 12 divine thrones. He couldn't be called directly by his name, nor could he be called directly by his realm. Thus, he was crowned with the words Venerable One, to show that his status was extremely respected. Within the ball of light, the blurry face spoke. This matter was a mistake in the gathering of information. The fault does not lie with the 7 god seats. "Yes, Your Honor," everyone said respectfully. Since his honor had personally endorsed the 7 gods, it naturally meant that the 7 gods did not lie. Regarding this, they could trust it. But even so, the matter did not end there. The 2 saints Zhou and Lin were killed on the spot, and the 7 god seats fled without a fight. This had caused a huge blow to the prestige of the Order of Dusk, to the divine thrones who wanted to rebuild the Dusk Order in the midst of the turmoil in vast Yang City. This was a difficult matter to accept. "Your Honor, the matter of the Peach Garden is too great. We must give an explanation, otherwise it will cause the hearts of the people to scatter, and it will be difficult for us to act in the future. Indeed, we serve the name of order. If we were to suffer a defeat in the Peach Garden, that would be looked down upon by others. Your Honor must think of a way to reverse the situation as soon as possible. The longer we delay, the greater the impact of this matter will be." The divine thrones all spoke up, their voices unable to conceal their worry. Within the ball of light, the blurry face's mouth opened and closed. "I already know what you are talking about. The Peach Garden's Qin Yu will die, and the Peach Garden will also be destroyed. At that time, all of this will vanish and things will return to normal." The 12 divine thrones stood up and bowed. "Your Honor's Tao is boundless." They didn't doubt these words at all. At practically the same time as the 12 divine thrones revealed cold smiles, in a distant place, something else was happening. In the barren wilderness, perhaps because of the arrival of the cold autumn season, all the vegetation had withered and turned yellow. There was a desolate and deathly silence. In this withered and yellow landscape, there was a small temple. From the surface, it seemed to have been in disrepair for many years. Mottled and damaged, it exuded a desolate and decadent aura. Half of the temple's main door was broken and the other half was also weak. It could barely hang on the doorframe. If one looked through the cracks, they could see that there were 2 clay statues placed on the altar within. It was clear that because they had withstood the baptism of time, the 2 statues were heavily modeled, and it was impossible to make out their expressions. There was only a faint trace of dignity left in their outlines. Suddenly, a wind rose up within the temple, stirring up dust. The 2 statues on the altar nearly opened their eyes at the same time. The mouth of the left statue moved, emitting an extremely soft sound. It was very, very soft. Even though one was very close, they still had to listen very carefully to make sure they could hear it clearly. It was like the statue was guarding against something in order to prevent its actions from being sensed by some unknown existence. "The person you are looking for has already been found." The taboo of the right statue seemed to have lessened by a great deal. Its voice rose several octaves, clearly conveying its attitude. There seemed to be a bit of resentment in its voice. "Who is it? Tell me." The left statue said, "We cannot be sure right now. But through this person, you should be able to find the truth. Speak." The voice of the left statue suddenly fell even lower. It barely managed to hear the words. Sword sect before it fell silent. Woo, another gust of wind blew past. The two statues closed their eyes and fell silent, as if nothing had happened at all and everything that happened before was just an illusion. But at this time, the feeling these two statues gave off was much more decayed and dispirited than before, as if they had withstood some invisible backlash. The great calamity of vast Yang had arrived. Qin Yu had returned from his trip to the Peach Garden, and he had killed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin in the midst of a fallen nation. This was a matter that everyone in the world of vast Yang knew of, including the netherworld saint who had died at his hands. 3 of the world's peak existences at the Permethought true saint level had perished at his hands. For a time, Qin Yu's reputation rose even higher. He faintly surpassed ordinary true saints and became the strongest existence below the ruler. But in the eyes of some people who knew more, the descriptions of Qin Yu in the rumors were extremely inaccurate. For instance, the Eastern Sea Dragon Saint. 3 true saints? Haha, you people are far too naive. How could you even begin to imagine Qin Yu's true methods? In the past, the master and disciple of the Peach Garden had used a shameless method to forcefully snatch away the supreme treasure of the Eastern Sea that originally belonged to him. Wasn't Lord Dragon Saint angry? Of course not. But why didn't the Dragon Saint get involved? When he attacked the Peach Garden, he didn't even express his stance. Was it because he was magnanimous and repaid evil with good? Bah, wasn't it because he was afraid? So what if the Garden Master died? The Peach Garden still had Qin Yu. This boy was a ruthless character. In the eyes of the Dragon Saint, he was even more terrifying than the Garden Master. As long as he was there, the Peach Garden wouldn't fall. Whoever rushed forward first would be the unlucky one. The facts proved Lord Dragon Saint's thoughts. The 2 sages Zhou and Lin who died on the spot were the best evidence. In this kind of environment where a true saint could suddenly die and everyone was in danger, some things that happened quietly seemed very inconspicuous. For example, the change in the Heavenly Sword sect. Although it had a long history and its influence wasn't weak, it was still only at the semi-saint level. It didn't attract too much attention. In fact, no one knew what had happened. It seemed that the Heavenly Sword sect had provoked a strong enemy and was suppressed in a day. And to be able to casually crush a sword sect with a profound background of a semi-saint, naturally, only a true saint could do it. This fact caused those who wanted to help the Heavenly Sword sect to only think about it for a moment before suppressing it without hesitation. The world had changed greatly. Chaos had arrived, and everyone was in danger. To be a good person, one had to bear the risk. And the terror represented by a true saint was enough to scare away most people who didn't have strong friendships. After all, not everyone was like Qin Yu of the Peach Garden, who could kill a true saint as easily as chopping melons and vegetables. In the current situation, the power and deterrence of a true saint might be shaken, but their level was still so high that it made people's hearts palpitate. Qin Yu stopped his closed-door cultivation again. This time, it was because of the thousand face. The stone tower had been monitoring her breath, and now it had reached the point where it had to intervene. Without alerting anyone, Qin Yu quietly came out of his closed-door cultivation and appeared outside the courtyard where the 7th senior sister lived. The eldest senior brother was still recovering, and no one knew when he would really wake up. The other disciples of the Peach Garden, including Baifeng who had already stepped into the divine path, were all diligently cultivating, striving to advance further as soon as possible. Therefore, no one noticed Qin Yu's current actions. He looked at the tightly shut door of the small courtyard, thought for a moment, and directly knocked on the door. No one answered, but Qin Yu knew that the 7th senior sister was inside, so he patiently repeated the knocking action. Finally, a slightly helpless voice sounded out. "Who is it?" Qin Yu's eyes flashed. 7th senior apprentice sister. Qin Yu requests an audience. After a pause, the Thousand Faces voice continued. "It's junior apprentice brother. It's not convenient for me to see you right now, so I'll go back first." Qin Yu shook his head. "I came here to help senior apprentice sister, and my attitude towards helping others has always been firm. If you don't open the door, I can only force my way in." After another period of silence, the Thousand Face lightly said, If that's the case, then junior apprentice brother, come in. The courtyard door opened, and Chinyu stepped in. The thousand face was sitting under the peach tree that was related to her aura. Now that the peach blossoms were in full bloom, a light fragrance lingered in his nose. She had a strange but charming face. She frowned and said, "You see me?" If junior apprentice brother doesn't have anything else to say, then please leave. Chinyu sat down and smiled. Those who come from afar are guests, and those who come recently are also guests. So, I asked 7th senior apprentice sister to bring me a cup of tea. The thousand face frowned. She stared at Chinyu. "I advise you to leave now." Chinyu tapped a finger on the table. "If I don't drink the tea, I won't leave." The thousand face clenched her teeth. She took a deep breath and left. Soon, she returned and placed a cup of tea in front of Chinyu. "Hurry up and drink it. Once you're done, you'll leave." "Thank you, senior apprentice sister." Chinyu smiled. He picked up the teacup and sniffed it. He praised, "Good tea. Senior apprentice sister has a collection. So how about you give me some? After all, drinking too much wine is harmful to the body, but tea can still be drunk." The thousand face stared at Chinyu. Her eyebrows were tightly furrowed and her body tensed up as if she were enduring something. "Junior apprentice brother, you really should leave. Why drag yourself into unnecessary troubles?" After a pause, she lightly said, "I admit that there are indeed some problems right now, but this isn't important. I have confidence in how to deal with them." Chinyu took a sip of tea. "Good. Since senior apprentice sister says so, I won't meddle in this anymore." He lifted the teacup. "I will keep my word. Once I finish this cup of tea, I will naturally leave." The thousand faces complexion relaxed a little. She sat down across from him. "All right." The courtyard fell silent. Only the sound of Chinyu drinking tea could be heard. His movements were gentle, and his speed wasn't too fast or too slow. The amount of tea continued to decrease. Just as it was about to reach the bottom, the thousand faces complexion began to pale. Large beads of sweat began to appear on her forehead. She clearly had a pained appearance, but the charm on her face only became thicker. On the contrary, the depths of the thousand faces' eyes became increasingly cold. It was like someone was slowly awakening within her and constantly eroding her consciousness. "You should leave." She clenched her teeth, her body shivering. Chinyu raised an eyebrow. "I haven't finished drinking the tea yet." The thousand face coughed. In front of Chinyu, she suddenly changed her face. She was as beautiful and moving as ever, but as her face changed, the feeling she gave off also changed. Walala! Above her head, the peach tree swayed without wind. Large swathes of peach blossoms sprinkled down. "Chinyu, right? I'm very curious as to how you discovered me." The thousand face chuckled. She stared at Chinyu with a playful look in her eyes. His figure was reflected in her eyes, incomparably clear, like two mirrors. At this moment, an invisible and terrifying aura covered Chinyu. He bitterly smiled, thinking that he was done for. Things had gotten out of hand. The stone pagoda had misled him. This person was far stronger than he had imagined. Before he could carry out his plan to eliminate her, he would have to abandon it. Moreover, if he wasn't careful, the entire peach garden would be endangered. The consequences would be inconceivable. When had this world become so dangerous? How could anyone live like this? Now that the thousand face was looking at him, even though she hadn't done anything, Chinyu felt as if he had been stabbed by an axe. It was like if he wasn't careful, he would be cut apart by a cold light. This feeling was terrifying to the extreme. But with things having come this far, there was clearly no room for retreat. Moreover, Chinyu asked himself if he had the strength to resist. For instance, that sword and that woman. In a critical moment, what he could rely on wasn't his own strength. This was truly a sad and sorrowful matter. Chinyu's heart of becoming stronger was stimulated once more. He thought that if he could safely survive today, he would have to work even harder in his cultivation. He steadied his mind and cupped his hands together. Distant and unknown, mysterious and formidable existence. The reason I have appeared here today is to make a deal with you. The thousand-faced's lips curved up. You want to save her? Chinyu didn't deny it. He directly said, I will give you sufficient compensation. The thousand-faced lifted a hand and rapped the table. She coldly said, strictly speaking, she is already my prey. If you want to take away my prey, that is a very offensive matter. The rapping paused, and her voice became even colder. So, I must obtain more compensation in order to quell my anger. At that time, I might consider your unreasonable request. Chapter 1432. It was good that he was willing to make a bid. It was better than fighting over a disagreement. Although Chinyu believed that he still had some cards in his hand, it was best not to make a big fuss. He steadied his mind and did his best to appear calm and composed. He raised a hand. Please speak. Across from him, the thousand-faced assassin looked at him, a faint smile in her eyes. Chinyu's thoughts stirred. This meant that he would take the initiative to make a bid. He thought for a moment and said, a true saint-level soul. The stone pagoda had already roughly explained to Chinyu what had happened to the thousand-faced assassin. He also knew what the true goal of these terrifying existences that loved to cross endless space and sign contracts with others was. So, what he offered was certainly what the other party was most interested in. The thousand-faced assassin sneered. Who are you looking down on? These words were a bit direct. Chinyu's heart shrank. He looked at her, and his first thought was that the reward wasn't enough. He had to continue increasing it. But before he could speak, he was stopped by the stone pagoda. Master, do not fall for her trap. The thousand-faced assassin might have some areas that interest him, but a true saint-level soul is more than enough to exchange for her. This sort of mysterious existence is usually crazy and greedy. If they judge that you are willing to pay a higher price to save the thousand-faced assassin, things will become very troublesome. Chinyu's heart chilled. He agreed with the stone pagoda's judgment. After a brief pause, he revealed an awkward expression and bitterly smiled. Mysterious and formidable existence. A true saint soul is more than enough to compensate for your losses. I hope you can carefully consider this. The thousand-faced assassin began to tap the table again. She stared at Chinyu with icy cold eyes. A true saint's soul for this woman is indeed a good deal, but it is different for you. After all, slaughtering a saint should be very simple for you. She brightly smiled. I am also well aware of the matter of killing 2 true saints in one fell swoop during a fallen nation. Chinyu's lips twitched. What was this? Was he showing off his wealth? This mysterious existence that occupied the thousand-faced assassin's body clearly knew that he had captured the souls of Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. Thus, he didn't hesitate to demand such an exorbitant price. He had to resolve this matter as soon as possible. If he continued to be entangled, he didn't know what other requests he would make. Chinyu calmed himself. He cupped his hands together and said, What you say isn't wrong, but all transactions in this world must be reasonable and fair. As an unknown and formidable existence in space and time, I believe you will uphold this principle. He looked up. So please state your price. The thousand-faced assassin gently tapped the table, as if he were thinking. After several breaths of time, he chuckled, I want a complete, true divine. She stared at Chinyu. The tapping speed of her fingers became even slower, but it gave off an increasingly invisible pressure. Remember, it has to be complete. His flesh and blood, his soul, none of it can be missing. Chinyu had a troubled look on his face. To him, killing a true sage was not a difficult task. However, to suppress a true sage and then sacrifice him was simply too difficult. There was basically no possibility of success. In fact, even a hegemon might not be able to accomplish such a feat. The true saint of the Nirvana realm had already condensed the great Tao. Even if it was difficult for him to resist and get caught, it was not difficult for him to end his own life. After all, even an idiot would know that once he was sacrificed to those mysterious and formidable unknown existences in space, the consequences he faced would probably be even more terrifying than death. The thousand-faced assassin raised his hand and pointed in front of him. The black flames instantly exploded and turned into a scroll. At that moment, it unfurled on its own. As the tongues of fire swam on its surface, they condensed into strange runes. Once you sign this contract, the next true sage you kill will naturally become my sacrifice. So, things are not as difficult as you think. As long as you kill another true sage, we can complete the deal. Qin Yu's complexion changed. Although the stone tower did not explain too much, he was filled with dread towards these strange, mysterious, and formidable existences that hid in space and time. Signing a contract with them was tantamount to dancing on the tip of a knife. If he was not careful and fell, he would be pierced through from inside out and suffer an extremely tragic fate. Towards this, he instinctively resisted. Are you suspecting that I have ulterior motives? The thousand-faced assassin narrowed his eyes and suddenly sneered. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. You are thinking too much. I have no such intentions. As he spoke, he had already urged the stone tower to quickly figure out what was written on this contract. Fortunately, the stone tower had done some research in this area and quickly replied, Master, there is no problem with the contract. But you must guarantee that within a month, you will kill a true sage and offer him as a sacrifice. Otherwise, according to the contract, you will be used as a substitute and become his prey. This fellow was truly sinister. At least from the beginning until now, he had never reminded Qin Yu that there was a time limit to the contract. A month seemed like a long time, but to a cultivator, it was often nothing more than a small period of seclusion. If Qin Yu didn't know this, then he would be in deep trouble after a month passed. Are you sure there are no other problems with the contract? The stone tower gave an affirmative reply. In truth, there is one thing that Master is not wrong about. The reason that these mysterious existences are able to continue existing since ancient times is because they keep their promises. Perhaps they will play some tricks that are allowed by the rules, but they will not lie about the contents of the contract. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu flicked his finger and a drop of blood flew out. It fell onto the flame contract and fused into it. The flames on its surface immediately turned the color of blood. At the same time, a binding strength appeared in Qin Yu's senses. It shot into the skies and sank into the dark nothingness, connecting with a distant existence. The thousand-faced assassin revealed a satisfied smile. Very good. The contract has been signed. I will let her go for now. After a pause, her eyes flashed. I know that it isn't easy to hunt true saints in your world, so this matter isn't urgent. You can arrange it as you see fit. Before this, I will do my best to restrain my desire to eat her so that her fragile soul isn't harmed. Qin Yu cursed the thousand-faced assassin's sinister intentions. He stood up and bowed. To the mysterious and formidable existence of space-time, I thank you for your generosity and tolerance. Shua, the thousand-faced assassin's face changed again. At the same time, the consciousness that controlled this body also changed. The mysterious existence that arrived here through the power of the contract had already retreated. The thousand-faced assassin opened her eyes, revealing a dim light and a trace of fear. The thousand-faced assassin looked at Qin Yu and forced out a smile. Thank you, little junior apprentice brother. Qin Yu said, I won't ask about the specific reason. I will also help senior apprentice sister resolve this matter. He sighed and said, in the future, do not sign a contract with these mysterious existences again. Luck was good this time, but good luck won't always be with us. Indeed, the thousand-faced assassin's luck was very good. She had encountered this mysterious existence of space-time that still possessed a clear consciousness and the ability to think. If it weren't for this, then after the contract expired or some other agreement was fulfilled, her soul would have been swallowed up and there would have been no chance to save her. The thousand-faced assassin revealed a solemn expression. Little junior apprentice brother, rest assured that I will absolutely not do something like this again in the future. She lowered her head and sighed. She reached in her chest, and immediately there was a rubbing sound. Qin Yu stiffened. He thought to himself, seventh senior apprentice sister, what is the meaning of this? Although I did save you, I didn't have any other thoughts. But thinking about it, seventh senior apprentice sister could change her beautiful face every day. If he was with her, he would be the same as a groom every night. Eldest senior apprentice brother, is so lucky. As Chin was seriously considering whether or not he should quickly slip away, seventh senior apprentice sister finally took out something from her chest. So she didn't want to take off her clothes. Chin let out a sigh of relief, but he also couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. He cursed himself in his heart. Indeed, men were creatures that were easily dominated by their lower half. Cough. Chin lightly coughed. He tried his best to appear calm and collected, trying to cover up some of his emotions. Luckily, seventh senior apprentice sister's mind was focused on the object in her hand, and she didn't notice anything. She glanced at him and said, "The reason I was able to survive the great calamity in the past was because of this object. I don't know what it is, but it is incomparably strange and possesses all sorts of inconceivable abilities." As she spoke to hear, the thousand-faced assassin paused for a moment. Then she sighed and said, "I originally thought that I could rely on this object to take revenge, but it seems that I overestimated my own abilities. I've never been able to truly obtain this object's approval. There is no meaning in keeping it in my hands any longer. Today, I will give it to little junior apprentice brother to express my gratitude." Chin wanted to wave his hand and say that senior apprentice sister was being too serious. They were both disciples of Peach Blossom Garden, so it was only natural for me to save her, but he couldn't say it. Or it could be said that he didn't dare to say it. This was because when the thousand-faced assassin took out the object in her hand, the sword of the East Sea that existed in his body, but he couldn't sense it at all, much less lock onto it, suddenly reacted. Its meaning was simple and clear. It wanted this object. Would Chin dare to refuse? Although the sword of the East Sea's reaction wasn't that intense, this was the first time it had reacted like this. Chin didn't believe that the object in the thousand-faced assassin's hand wasn't important. You dare to refuse? Humph. Do you believe I'll split you in half with a swing of my sword? Chin coughed again and said, "Thank you, seventh senior apprentice sister. In that case, it would be impolite of me to refuse." In front of him, the thousand-faced assassin's face revealed a trace of surprise. She really did want to give this object to him, but she didn't expect that her little junior brother would accept it without any hesitation. However, she didn't think too much about it. She only thought that her little junior brother might have sensed some of the magical aspects of this treasure. He reached out and took the object in the thousand-faced assassin's hand. It was a round bead the size of a knuckle. It looked like some sort of red pearl. Its surface was smooth and round, and it naturally emitted a faint halo. When it fell into Chin Yu's hand, the red bead suddenly lit up. Then, with a buzz, it disappeared. As the seventh senior apprentice sister saw this, she immediately confirmed her previous guess. She sighed with emotion and looked at Chin Yu. "As I thought, this bead was in my hands. Perhaps it has always been waiting for its true master. Now that I've handed it over to my little junior brother, it could be considered a pearl that has seen the light of day again. It's better than continuing to be covered in dust in my hands." Chin Yu's mouth moved, but in the end, he only smiled and didn't say anything. Did he want to say that he actually didn't know anything, that he didn't want this bead, and that he didn't even know what it was called? Cough, cough. This gave off the feeling that he was still pretending to be obedient after getting a bargain. However, this incident also proved one thing from the side. Good people really did have good karma. Although Chin didn't know what the bead was, just the fact that it could attract the sword of the East Sea's interest was enough to show how precious it was. If he hadn't helped the thousand-faced assassin, Chin naturally wouldn't have today's harvest. This fact tells us that we should try our best to be a good person within our capabilities. Perhaps we won't be able to obtain anything in a short period of time, but fate's compensation might have already been arranged, just waiting for a suitable time to be delivered into your hands. Returning to the main topic, Chin cupped his hands and said, "I won't hide it from senior apprentice sister. This bead is indeed useful to me. I will handle this matter properly. Senior apprentice sister, please rest assured." Since he had taken someone else's item, he naturally had to do things. to kill a true saint within a month. Oh, who should he start with? Although he had many enemies, most of those at the true saint level were already dead. The black-robed true saint who was scared away during the destruction of his country, or the powerful force behind him. But when it came to revenge, Qin, you could only passively endure it. How could he jump out and make arrangements? If the other party wasn't willing to make a move, then there was nothing he could do. No matter how he thought about it, there wasn't a single person who was tactful enough to deliver their head to him on their own initiative. This circle of enemies wasn't large enough. As his thoughts raced, Qin Yu stood up and bid his farewells. Seventh senior apprentice sister had just narrowly escaped death. Even if she appeared calm on the surface, her heart was still shaken. It was best to give her some time alone to sort out her thoughts. Little junior apprentice brother, take care. I won't send you off. Senior apprentice sister, please wait. After leaving the courtyard, Qin Yu took a deep breath. He couldn't help but rub his temples. He thought that he had only been saving people during this period of time. He hadn't thought he was so important before. Was this the so-called greater one's strength, the greater one's responsibility? He shook his head and suppressed these thoughts. There was still a month left, and he wasn't in a hurry to slaughter a saint. Thus, he would return first and go into seclusion for several more days. He had just reached a small juncture in perceiving the 5 inherited supernatural abilities. If he could smoothly cross it, then he would truly have crossed the threshold. When he used them, their might would rise. This feeling of being able to clearly feel his own strength constantly growing was truly refreshing. As Qin Yu hurried back to his courtyard to continue his seclusion, he didn't know that the matter of him saving people had not ended here. Moreover, he would soon discover that the idea that his circle of enemies wasn't large was ridiculously wrong. This was because the number of true saint heads that were about to be delivered to him was far greater than he had imagined. Xianji's face was pale, and her eyes were filled with fear. She lifted her hand and slashed forward. After tearing apart space, she stepped into it without hesitation. Something had happened to the Heavenly Sword sect. The other party's target was Ling Xiao, but it wasn't just him. Thinking of this, Xianji's entire body turned cold, and her face paled even more. Chapter 1433. There were mountains along the banks of the river. The mountains stretched into the skies, and the highest peak was called Sky Split Peak. This was the place where a half-saint was suppressed. The Sky Split Sword sect, which had many heroic disciples, was located here. But today, there were no sword lights howling through the skies. There was only a deathly silence in the air. At the peak of Sky Split Peak, 2 figures stood there. They watched as Xianshu tore through space and left, a cold light surging in their eyes. She has already left with the news. If there isn't an accident, she will soon bring back the true leader of World Zeroes. A person lightly said, his tone calm. The other person was silent for a moment. Then he said, I feel that there is something strange about this. We should be careful lest we are used by others. Humph. So what if we are used? In the end, we will find that person and tear him to shreds. Only then can the hatred in our hearts be dispelled. The second person sighed. He turned and said, Let's go. Make all preparations. I feel a bit uneasy. I fear that a tough battle will be inevitable. The person surging with killing intent nodded. Although he wished he could immediately kill that person, to be able to control all of this and destroy the Western Desolates' many years of painstaking preparation, he definitely wasn't someone easy to deal with. It wasn't wrong to have such a strong killing intent, but they couldn't be careless in the slightest. The 2 people turned and left. As they stepped out, the air rippled. Then, like a stone falling into water, they vanished from sight. Within the training room, Qin Yu let out a long breath. Then he opened his eyes. A sharp light surged within them, but it was difficult to conceal his joy. He had broken through. The process was more difficult than he had imagined, but it was also within his expectations. After all, there had never been such a harvest in this world. The stronger the power of the 5 inherited supernatural powers, the more difficult it was to cultivate them. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his shaken mind. After sensing for a moment, his lips curved up in a smile. Although he didn't have time to experiment, he could already feel that after reaching the next level, there were some marvelous changes that had occurred when the inherited supernatural powers cooperated with each other. But that didn't mean he didn't have any regrets. After cultivating to this step, there was no way for him to continue rapidly increasing his strength. Afterwards, he would slowly increase his proficiency. Only when he advanced to the next level would his strength increase by a large margin. In other words, Qin Yu's period of seclusion had temporarily ended, and from the time he had signed a contract with the mysterious existence within 7th Senior Apprentice Sister's body, 13 days had already passed. There were still 17 days left, a little more than half. He needed to kill a Permitha true saint within this period of time and sacrifice him to that person. Time was already very tight. Unless Qin Yu disregarded everything else and casually killed a true sage, he would have to start preparing. I'll go look for 3rd Senior Brother now and ask him if there are any other true divines who have ill intentions other than the dead sages Zhou and Lin. He stood up and pushed open the door, heading straight for Bai Feng's courtyard. The good news was that Bai Feng was very busy as the person in charge of the Peach Blossom Garden. She had to deal with many affairs, so she was not in seclusion. But the bad news was that Qin Yu received a negative answer from him. Unwilling to give up, he asked again, "Really?" Bai Feng nodded seriously. She glanced at his furrowed brows and asked hesitantly, "Little junior brother, is there something wrong?" Qin Yu waved his hand and said, "This is my private matter and has nothing to do with the Peach Blossom Garden. 3rd Senior Brother, you can rest assured." Bai Feng's eyebrows arched up. She took a deep breath and said, "Little junior brother is someone from the Peach Blossom Garden. Your matters are naturally the matters of the entire Peach Blossom Garden." After she finished speaking, she seemed to think of the great disparity in strength between them. Her aura suddenly weakened by a great deal. "Although we might not be able to help you, little junior brother might as well tell us. Perhaps we can help you think of a way." Qin Yu bitterly smiled inwardly. He glanced at White Phoenix's earnest expression. If he continued to be ambiguous, then he might really hurt 3rd Senior Apprentice Brother's face. It was impossible to keep this matter a secret. He would know sooner or later. Qin Yu directly said, "Because of some reasons, I need to kill a true sage within 17 days. 3rd Senior Brother should know that I don't like killing the innocent, so it's best if I can find a sufficient reason. That's why I came to ask you." His words were clear and straightforward, without the least bit of concealment. But why did it sound so strange to me? When did killing a true sage become something that could be casually mentioned? But thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange if it was Qin Yu. After all, not too long ago, he had killed Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. He really couldn't help it all. Bai Feng's lips twitched. "Little junior brother, it's best if you do some screening. Cough, cough. After all, cultivation isn't easy, and becoming a Permitha true sage is even more difficult. If they were killed by you for no reason at all, that would be too aggrieving." Inflated? I'm really inflated. As a mere half-saint, he actually dared to participate in a discussion about killing a true sage and even put forward a suggestion. However, I actually thought that it would be easy for Qin Yu to kill a true sage. If he wanted to kill, he would definitely be able to. Indeed, the adaptability of humans was far too strong. I've already begun to accept that Qin Yu could easily kill a true sage. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. "Thank you for the reminder, 3rd Senior Apprentice Brother. I will pay attention." He hadn't been able to obtain the information he wanted from Bai Feng. He already felt that he didn't have much time left, and now he felt even more pressed for time. Without further delay, he bid farewell to Bai Feng and then turned to leave. He felt that he couldn't stay in the Peach Garden any longer. He had to go out and find a chance to kill a true sage. After all, the great calamity had descended upon vast Sun City. This was a time of upheaval, and the saints weren't willing to be left out, so most of them would take action. As Qin Yu was considering whether or not he should go to the EC, well, the slogan of slaying a dragon was enough to make one's blood boil with excitement, but Qin Yu didn't have such thoughts. After all, the dragon sage was a fundamentally good dragon. Moreover, the dragon sage had gifted him the East Sea Sword. Qin Yu had personally experienced the might of this sword, and it could be said that besides that woman, it was the sharpest card in Qin Yu's hand. Just this point alone made it hard for Qin Yu to do something like biting the hand that fed him or tearing down the dragon after crossing the river. The reason he went to the East Sea was to make a deal with the dragon sage. For instance, if he helped him kill an enemy, he would receive some benefits in return. Cough, cough. I'll just take it as an extra harvest from cutting grass and hitting a rabbit. After all, the dragon sage had once produced a sharp treasure like the East Sea Sword. Qin Yu silently increased the wealth of the East Sea by several levels. Perhaps there would be a pleasant surprise. Just as Qin Yu made up his mind and was about to put into action, someone outside the peach garden asked to see him. With Qin Yu's current status in the peach garden, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the successor of the garden master. In the eyes of all the cultivators of the peach garden, he was their thigh and guardian. Anything that involved him would naturally be placed at the top of the list. Therefore, even though it was crowded outside the peach garden with a large number of people waiting to be summoned, the report was placed in front of Qin Yu at the fastest speed possible. Qin Yu probed the jade slip with his divine sense and saw the person who asked to see him. He raised his eyebrows and looked up, saying, "Bring her in." Although she had guessed that her request wouldn't be rejected, being summoned so quickly still made Xianji happy. This showed that Mr. Ninth had no intention of declining. She hurriedly entered the peach garden. She didn't have time to appreciate the atmosphere of this top holy land of vast Sun City. She arrived outside Qin Yu's small courtyard. "Mr. Ninth, Miss Xianji has arrived." Qin Yu's voice sounded out as the courtyard doors opened. "Let her in." The peach garden cultivator who led the way moved to the side. He bowed and said, "Please." Xianji nodded. She quickly walked into the courtyard. Her eyes swept around and fell onto Qin Yu, who was standing in the courtyard. "Greetings, Mr. Ninth." Qin Yu glanced at her and said, "You look a little flustered. Did something happen?" Xianji hurriedly said, "Mr. Ninth, something has happened to the Heavenly Sword sect." Ling Zhao's figure appeared in his mind. He looked in front of him and saw Xianji's anxious and restless face. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. "Explain in detail." Xianji immediately recounted how she heard that something had happened to the Heavenly Sword sect and how she secretly went to investigate. There was a bit of apprehension in her eyes. She could only try her best to appear objective and not threaten Qin Yu. "That's what happened. I discovered that they were interrogating people from the Heavenly Sword sect and that they were involved behind the scenes of World Zeroes. I didn't dare to delay and hurriedly left. Then I came to the peach garden." Qin Yu rubbed his temples. "You're saying that you snuck in and then came back out." Xianji nodded. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. He glanced at her. Although he didn't say anything, Xianji was still a smart woman. She had already sensed some things from his eyes. Her complexion changed, paling and helpless. "Mr. Ninth, are you saying that they discovered me and deliberately let me go?" Qin Yu lightly said, "The Heavenly Sword sect originally had a half-saint guarding it. And then there was Ling Zhao. To be able to suppress the entire sect in one fell swoop, only a true saint could accomplish this. When you entered and left the Heavenly Sword sect, it was impossible to hide from a true saint's eyes. If they didn't attack you, then they must be following behind you to lock onto my position. But since there hasn't been any movement even now, then it should be the latter possibility." Xianji's face paled. She subconsciously said, "What?" Qin Yu said, "They lured me to the Heavenly Sword sect." He held his hands behind his back and paced back and forth several times, looking at the blooming peach blossoms above his head. "It seems that there's a trap there, and there's a high chance that it was set up to target me." Xianji's face paled even more. She gently bit her lips, unable to say a single word in her heart. She knew that if there wasn't an accident, then Qin Yu's guess was likely correct. In other words, the Heavenly Sword sect was a trap. How could she persuade Qin Yu to save Ling Zhao? And if he couldn't save Ling Zhao with the methods of a true saint, it was only a matter of time before they found out the truth. At that time, it would likely be their turn. Thinking of this, Xianji's entire body turned ice cold. Qin Yu paced back and forth, his expression calm. It was impossible to see what he was thinking, but the truth was that at this time, he felt as if he had worn out his iron shoes in fruitless searching only to find what he was looking for. Just as he was thinking about where he could find a true saint to kill, someone immediately came knocking on his door. If this person wasn't from the Western Desolation, then they were the remnants of that clan. Qin Yu didn't feel any psychological burden killing them. The only thing he needed to worry about was that these people were clearly setting up a trap, so they must have some sort of assurance. The Western Desolation and that clan were extremely strong. Who knew if they had some sort of terrifying and mysterious method up their sleeves? Even if Qin Yu's current strength could be called at the peak of strength below the ruler realm, there was still a chance that he would encounter problems if he fell into their trap. Unless he could predict the degree of danger ahead of time or obtain a powerful safeguard, he wouldn't be able to escape even if there was a problem. There shouldn't be any problems using that sword. If he wanted to be a bit more safe, then it would be best if he could obtain that woman's promise. After all, with her cultivation, even if she just stretched out a finger, she could instantly reverse the situation. Thinking of this, Qin Yu looked at the panic-stricken Xianji across from him. He could naturally guess what she was thinking. But right now, Qin Yu couldn't give her a promise. He said in a low voice, "Wait here." As he spoke, he turned and entered the training room. After activating the spells, he personally sealed off the aura inside and outside. Then, Qin Yu took a deep breath and began to try. Well, it shouldn't be a problem to try, right? After all, they could be considered acquaintances. Moreover, when she left, she didn't say that he couldn't summon her. As he comforted himself, Qin Yu lifted his hands. In the next moment, the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared above his head, their light fusing together. Normally, Qin Yu should have lifted his hand and slashed out with that swift and fierce sword. But right now, he was only looking for someone, so there shouldn't be a need to tear down his own residence. Several breaths of time later, as the sun and moon overlapped, the woman's impatient voice suddenly sounded out. "Boy, what do you want now?" Qin Yu was overjoyed. He hurriedly said, "Qin Yu greets your excellency sovereign." Afraid that the other party would become impatient and cut off the connection, he hurriedly explained the situation. In the end, the Heavenly Sword Sect's mishap today was all because of me. Although I've already paid the reward, I still can't feel at ease if I ignore it, so humph. So you want to give yourself a guarantee that if you cause any trouble, I'll clean up your mess for you. Qin Yu's face stiffened. Although this was indeed the case, for better or worse, she was still a woman. Wasn't it a bit too rude to speak to a man like him like this? The sovereign clearly didn't have the time to care about Qin Yu's awkwardness. He coldly sneered several times and said, "I can promise you, but not everything in this world comes without a price. I will give you a mission soon, and you'd best complete it beautifully." There was clearly a second half to these words. It was likely that if he couldn't complete it, then he should just humph. But he was an adult, and there were some things that didn't need to be said too clearly. It was fine as long as he understood. Without giving Qin Yu a chance to refute or negotiate, the sun and moon phantoms extinguished with two popping sounds, as if two bubbles had been popped. It was clear that the Lord Ruler was expressing his dissatisfaction at being disturbed once again. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He felt that if he sold himself out, it wouldn't be easy for him to complete the mission in the future. But he had already agreed to it. Even if today's events didn't occur, there was no way for him to bargain. Whatever, he would worry about the future in the future. In the end, the sovereign wouldn't send him to his death. He cleaned up his expression. He turned and pushed open the door. When he returned to the rice paper, he had transformed back into the calm and dignified Peach Garden Mr. Knife. He lightly said, "Let's go. We are going to the Heavenly Sword Sect." Chapter 1434. Within vast Yang, there were many small worlds like islands in the sea, countless of them. In order to travel across the islands, one could only pass through the sea region that separated them. But besides a few small worlds that had fixed transmission channels built between them, most of the time one could only rely on their own strength to resist. This was certainly not an easy matter. This was because the sea region that separated the small worlds from each other was actually called the Void Beyond. That was a life-forbidden zone, but that didn't mean there were no dangers. On the contrary, even if all of the small worlds within Vastion were added together, they would only take up less than 20% of the entire Vastion world. The rest was nothing but nothingness, the pitch-black nothingness of the Void Beyond. Such a vast area bred and gave birth to terrifying life forms that swam through the dark nothingness. Cultivators that had the qualifications to come into contact with them and knew of their existence still called them realm void creatures. They were incredibly dangerous. But now, Qinyu was holding on to Xianji. The two of them were hurtling through the Void Beyond at an astonishing speed. Without warning, the two of them came to a sudden stop. Although they couldn't see anything, with their formidable perception abilities as cultivators, Xianji knew that just now, an incomparably massive tentacle had swept past them by a hair's breadth. Although the two sides hadn't made contact, the aura that this tentacle emitted caused fear to rise in Xianji's heart. A long time ago, she had heard her honorable master mention that realm void creatures liked to hunt down powerful cultivators. Thus, the more powerful an existence was, the more likely it was to arouse their interest. It seemed that swallowing the flesh and blood and souls of powerful cultivators was greatly beneficial to realm void creatures. When she was rushing to the peach garden, although she had encountered void creatures, they weren't as strong as the one she encountered today. Moreover, they didn't seem to be too interested in her. But today was different. Thinking of the rumors and the various horrors of void creatures, Xianji's eyes filled with fear. At this time, Qinyu's calm voice echoed in her ears. "Wait here. Don't move." As he spoke, he let go and howled away. Several breaths of time later, there was a wild explosion. Faint shockwaves swept out before everything calmed down. Qinyu returned. He grabbed Xianji and continued on his way. So strong. Before this, she had heard that Mr. Ninth had relied on his own strength to suppress and kill Saint Zhou and Saint Lin. But today, she truly realized just how terrifying Qin Yu's strength was. Just now, that void creature had only used a single tentacle to sweep over, and it had already made her mind tremble. She felt as if she couldn't contend against it. However, even though he was so powerful, he was still easily defeated by Mr. Ninth. Could it be that his strength had already touched upon the level of a supreme ruler? Most likely not. Otherwise, there would have been some sort of strange phenomenon. After all, there was no way to conceal something like becoming a ruler. The entire boundless Yang world would have sensed it. However, even if she hadn't reached the level of a ruler, Mr. Ninth's cultivation realm was definitely at the pinnacle of a true saint. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she could look down on the entire world. With his help, he would definitely be able to save Ling Xiao and destroy the heavenly sword sect scheme. Thinking to this point, the rice paper's trembling heart suddenly calmed down, and a large portion of its uneasiness dissipated. On the grassland, palaces with red walls and black tiles stood layer upon layer, and they revealed a solemn and grand aura. Countless devout believers in thick felt knelt down with every step they took, praying for protection. A bald, red-robed monk with a pitch-black complexion held a prayer tube in his hands, a compassionate expression on his face. He looked down at the countless believers below him, constantly chanting. His whispers fused together, and there seemed to be a bit of spirituality to them. Suddenly, above the red palace, beneath the blue skies and white clouds, it was like a mirror had been heavily kicked and shattered. Qinyu pulled the rice paper out. His eyes swept over the ground, but he didn't pause at all. He took another step and soared into the skies. Hurrying through the void, one had to constantly determine their direction in order to avoid any deviation. Otherwise, if they only focused on rushing forwards, it was likely they would discover that they had run into some unknown place. There had been many precedents of this in the past. This was only a very ordinary positioning movement during the journey. Through a lucky chance, it fell into the eyes of the people below. The monk outside the red palace paused for a moment, the prayer tube in his hands trembling. Then, there was a bit of anger in his eyes. There was actually a cultivator from another side that had broken through to the holy palace. This was the greatest offense. But before they could respond, a peaceful voice sounded out in their ears. The monks revealed a look of understanding. They turned and bowed towards the red palace. Facing the confused and bewildered eyes of the believers, a monk stepped out. His warm and gentle voice spread through the air. Just now, my sect god was inspecting the heavens and was shocked. For all of you to be able to witness it, it is truly a great fortune. The believers immediately revealed fanatical expressions. They knelt even more devoutly, and their chanting became even louder. However, they did not see that in the palace they were kneeling in a brightly lit quiet room, there was an old man in a gold and red robe with a dignified and solemn expression. At this moment, he was raising his hand to wipe the fine beads of sweat that covered his forehead. He looked up, his wise and deep eyes staring at the place where that aura first appeared and then vanished again. He swept his eyes over the disciples below. That person just now is a true overlord of this world, a terrifying existence that can sweep away a part of the world. You absolutely cannot provoke him. Yes, teacher. The disciples respectfully bowed, their eyes filled with shock. In their eyes, their honorable master was already an immortal level character, but he actually felt such dread and awe. Just how powerful was that person just now? A world overlord. Could he be a legendary saint? Qin Yu borrowed the great furnace to condense his own great Tao. Of course, he had the qualifications to be called a saint. But thinking about it carefully, someone who walked the path of a true divinity was actually able to condense their great Tao and become a saint. This was truly a strange matter. Of course, he didn't know that as he passed by, he had frightened a rather fierce cultivator. To put it bluntly, with Qin Yu's current cultivation and boundary, anyone that wasn't a saint was no different from an ant in his eyes. Naturally, no one would constantly care about the feelings and performance of an ant beneath their feet. Moreover, there was another reason he didn't have time to think about it. He was about to arrive at the Heavenly Sword sect. Knowing that this was a trap, he still stepped into it on his own initiative. This didn't feel good at all. The only comforting thing was that Qin Yu had obtained that woman's guarantee that if anything happened, she could help him clean up his mess. Hum. This woman's words were a bit unpleasant to hear. Thinking about it now, he still felt angry. But compared to safety, whether he was angry or not wasn't anything at all. So, he endured it as long as he could. Xianji, who was filled with awe and worship deep in her heart, would never have imagined that the incomparably powerful Mr. Ninth, who was like a mountain that supported the heavens, would actually have such a depressing and spineless thought. Otherwise, her eyes would have widened, and she would have found this hard to accept. A moment later, Qin Yu punched out and the dark void in front of him shattered. He pulled Xianji along and stepped forwards. Light sprinkled down. The blazing sun hung high in the sky. He narrowed his eyes and looked around, confirming that he hadn't gone the wrong way. He had arrived at the Heavenly Sword sect. With a stir of his divine sense, he could sense this world. The sword intent that soared into the skies, although much thinner now, was still as dazzling as a lighthouse in the dark night. His eyes fell on Xianji. This woman was truly smart. She bowed and said, "Mr. Ninth, the Heavenly Sword sect is over there." Qin Yu pulled her along. With just a few steps, he crossed the endless space and appeared above a great river. The river was surrounded by mountains. As he looked around, he soon locked onto a particularly steep and tall peak. He narrowed his eyes, thinking that he was right in them. This aura, deep in Qin Yu's eyes, there was a flash of hesitation and surprise. But soon, it was covered up, and everything returned to tranquility. Thinking for a moment, Qin Yu turned and said, "Don't go in, stay a bit further away. Before I appear, don't approach." Xianji knew that the disparity in their cultivations was too great, and staying behind was useless. She respectfully said, "I ask Mr. Ninth to be careful." Qin Yu nodded. His figure flashed, and he appeared on that tall and steep peak. A light seemed to flash in the depths of his pitch-black eyes. His lips curved up in a smile, and he stepped in. As if he had rushed into water, faint ripples appeared in the air, and he vanished from sight. Seeing this scene, Xian Ji's heart tightened. He quickly turned around and left, fleeing far away with a whoosh. When he was in the outside world, he could clearly see the layers of palaces and buildings atop the Heavenly Sword Sect's main peak. But after stepping inside, he discovered that this was only an illusion. It was pitch black inside, as if an eternal night had arrived, isolating and expelling all light. This situation was similar to when he passed through the void. But what was different was that in this darkness, there was still a bit of light. Was he the one who lured him over? Qin Yu's thoughts raced. His figure shot straight towards the light. Since he had already entered the trap of his own initiative, there was no need to worry too much. And there was no need to search for the person who set this up. They would soon jump out on their own initiative and expose themselves in front of Qin Yu. A bit of light spread out from the hall. It wasn't bright, like a candle in a cold winter night. Qin Yu landed outside the hall. His feet were silent. He took several steps forwards and pushed open the door. In the place where the dim light was radiating was a chair, soaring cloud. His clothes were clean and tidy. He sat down on the chair. His face was pale. He watched as the door opened and Qin Yu walked in. His eyes were moved, followed by a bitter light. "Mr. Ninth, you shouldn't have come here." His voice was hoarse and weak, as if he had shouted just now. Qin Yu had a calm expression. "Whether I should or shouldn't, I've already come. So, there is no need to speak any more useless nonsense. It would be better to save some strength so that you don't suffer more." As he looked down, he could clearly see that just by barely saying a few words, Ling Zhao's clean robes had several bloody spots bursting out. It could be imagined that besides his face, it would be hard to find another part of his body that wasn't injured. To deal with a powerful cultivator, the methods he used wouldn't be as simple as flesh and blood torture. This was enough to draw a conclusion from Ling Zhao's current performance. For a half-saint cultivator to be unable to repair his mortal body's wounds, the degree of his weakness could be imagined. But even in this situation, Ling Zhao still didn't speak and didn't reveal Qin Yu's identity. Qin Yu shook his head. He didn't know whether he should praise Ling Zhao for being stubborn or for being inflexible. But in his heart, he couldn't help but appreciate Ling Zhao a little more. Ling Zhao bitterly smiled. It wasn't because of Qin Yu's sarcasm, but because he knew that Mr. Ninth's appearance here today had already indicated his stance. He was moved. "Mr. Ninth, be careful. They already have." With a stuffy cough, he was interrupted before he could finish. Rumble, rumble. The entire hall instantly disintegrated. An icy cold and terrifying aura drilled out from the darkness from all directions like chains, covering Qin Yu within. He looked up at the pitch-black sky that was revealed after the hall collapsed. His eyes flashed, and he lightly said, "Don't worry, it won't be a problem." The sound of footsteps rang out, accompanied by a cold and low laugh. "The Peach Garden's ninth Qin Yu. I never thought that the one who came today would be you." Qin Yu turned his head. Beneath Ling Zhao's feet, in a light that hadn't yet been extinguished, he could faintly make out a figure. "Someone from the Western Desolation?" The person lightly said. "It seems that Mr. Ninth knows a great deal of secrets." Qin Yu said, "When I saw this darkness, I naturally guessed it. But I am curious as to why you have such great courage. You actually dare to appear in front of me. By yourself." As the figure walked out from the darkness, his complexion changed, and he instantly vanished. In the next moment, where he stood, the darkness fiercely twisted, as if a great maw had opened wide. One could hear sharp fangs grinding against each other, emitting shrill sounds. Shua! This person's figure appeared. As he thought about how he could instantly teleport in the darkness with the help of an external force, he feared he would have fallen into Qin Yu's trap. His complexion immediately paled. "Mr. Ninth's methods are excellent. No wonder you were able to rely on the strength of a single strike to forcefully kill two true saints." After a brief pause, his voice became increasingly gloomy. But today, since the Western Desolation has set up a trap, they have naturally made thorough preparations. No matter who comes today, they will be consigned to eternal damnation. And Mr. Ninth is no exception. Pa! Pa! The sound of footsteps rang out again. One by one, figures walked out from the darkness. In the blink of an eye, 5 true saints appeared. Their auras completely blended with the darkness, releasing an incomparably powerful pressure. There is one thing that Mr. Ninth is wrong about. Since I know it is you, of course, I will not appear here alone. The conversation ended, and the dim light underling Zhao's feet was finally extinguished. When everything returned to darkness, the 5 darkness true divines struck at the same time. At this moment, the surrounding darkness seemed to have come alive. A terrifying pressure came from all directions like a raging wave, wanting to crush Qinyu into pieces. It was truly terrifying, not only because the attackers were 5 true saints of darkness, but also because the darkness today was extraordinary. Even the ruler of the vast sun world would not be able to escape unscathed after falling into this darkness. This was the reason why the Western Desolation dared to attack and set up this trap. No matter who it was, as long as they stepped into it, they would definitely die. This was indeed the truth. With the horror of the darkness today, anyone below the ruler level would die. Although Qinyu was strong, he was not a ruler. There was still an obvious difference in strength between them. He indeed did not have the strength to resist. But coincidentally, Qinyu also knew a little about darkness. Although he was not as proficient as the 5 true saints of darkness, it was not difficult for him to identify the source of the darkness. Thus, he had long discovered that the darkness today could be barely considered as one of them. As for why he used the word barely to describe it, it was because Qinyu still did not understand why it was one of them. Chapter 1435. At the main hall of the main peak, the 5 darkness true saints stood around and felt the resistance from the darkness in front of them. Even though they were filled with killing intent, they still couldn't help but feel shocked and impressed. The 9 Qinyu of the Peach Garden was actually so formidable. Even with the combined strength of the 5 of them and the Eye of Eternal Night helping them, they still weren't able to directly kill him. This was truly an unbelievable matter. But now it happened in front of them. Even though the 5 darkness true saints were impressed, they couldn't help but feel shocked. Qinyu's strength was only a step away from the ruler realm. If they weren't careful enough, the trap that they had set up might have devoured them and buried them here. Luckily, such a sad and terrifying situation didn't happen. Even though Qinyu was stronger than they had imagined, since he was already suppressed, it was only a matter of time before he was killed. Regarding this point, they had asked the Eye of Eternal Night and received a definite reply. But in reality, everything that they saw could be fake, not to mention the thick layer of darkness that they couldn't see clearly. Therefore, at this moment, the truth was different for what the 5 darkness true saints thought. For example, Qinyu wasn't so strong that he was only a step away from the ruler realm. But his current state was much more relaxed than they had imagined. He didn't resist or struggle at all. That was because all the terrifying forces that came from all directions couldn't even touch him at all. They were all neutralized by the darkness in front of him. As expected, he was one of them. Qinyu frowned and cupped his hands. "I have Eternal Night. Although you have helped me today, I still have to ask why? This isn't because I don't know what's good for me. It's something that needs to be clarified." In the thick darkness, a cold and calm voice sounded. "You have the aura of my master." Honestly speaking, Qinyu had guessed many possibilities. For example, he had extraordinary talent and luck, which was why he was favored by treasures and so on. But the truth proved that it was better not to daydream too much. It was useless and would only waste one's energy. No. From what the Eye of Eternal Night said, could it be that he was the reincarnated body of his master? After cultivating to this day, Qinyu naturally knew that something like samsara really did exist. Unfortunately, The eye of eternal night seemed to have sensed his thoughts at this moment and coldly pointed it out without hesitation. "You are not my master." Qin Yu coughed, trying his best not to reveal an awkward expression. "Then what did you say? Also, who is your master?" "My lord is naturally the most powerful existence in the world. He stands above all things." At this moment, there was a hint of fanaticism in his icy voice. The corners of Qin Yu's lips twitched. In truth, he had already guessed this before, but now he was able to confirm it. Given the eye of eternal night's level and power, only an even more powerful existence could become its master, and Qin Yu just so happened to have such an existence standing behind him. The simple method of elimination was to confirm that the eye of eternal night was referring to her. That woman's origin was indeed related to the western wilderness. This would also explain why the eye of eternal night, which had come aggressively at the eastern sea, had taken the initiative to retreat. From that moment on, it had already sensed the aura of that woman on Qin Yu's body. "Do not be disrespectful to my lord." A cold shout rang out in the darkness, and a dense aura locked onto him. Qin Yu was secretly startled. Although he knew that the eye of eternal night was incomparably powerful, only after personally sensing it did he realize that it might be even stronger than he had imagined. But on the surface, Qin Yu didn't reveal any fear. He lightly said, "I naturally respect His Excellency ruler. There is no need for you to say anything more." Bastard, just where did this master and servant pair get this ability from? They could actually sense the thoughts of others. This was truly a divine skill. All right, Qin Yu had to admit that he was a bit envious. If he could obtain this ability, he would be able to do anything he wanted. Humph! The eye of eternal night coldly snorted, a hint of disdain in its eyes. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This fellow must have sensed something again. So, I'm being looked down upon? Damn, taking without asking is stealing. To actually steal my thoughts, this is too much. No, I also want to learn. I must learn. Qin Yu did his best to control his thoughts. He said, "Although the eye of eternal night has expressed its goodwill many times, I must still verify this matter." There was a brief silence in the darkness. Then, the voice sounded out once more. "You can summon Master's will." The voice was excited, but there was also a bit of disbelief in it. There were very few of those emotions after that, but unfortunately they were caught by Qin Yu. His thoughts turned, and he immediately reacted. Forever. The eye of eternal night was jealous. It was clear that although this fellow called His Excellency ruler master, it clearly didn't place much importance on this servant. It didn't even know how to contact her. Qin Yu's lips curved up. He finally felt that he had one around. He lightly coughed and said, "What else? Since you call yourself the ruler's subordinate, then I must ask His Excellency ruler to verify your authenticity. Don't worry, this matter is very simple. I have already summoned him many times." "Humph humph, you dare shout at me? I will definitely let you experience what it means to show off." The eye of eternal night stuffily coughed. It was clear that it had received the intense thought fluctuations that Qin Yu had deliberately sent out. Seeing it finally close its mouth, Qin Yu lifted his hands. With a thought, the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared, their light fusing together. At this time, Qin Yu's mind was completely focused on summoning His Excellency ruler. He didn't notice that when the phantoms of the sun and moon appeared, the darkness around him began to shake, as if it had seen something extremely shocking. He had already bragged just now, so he could not respond. Otherwise, how could he have one around just now? He would be ridiculed twice as much. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. Just as Qin Yu was feeling apprehensive, an impatient voice sounded out, "You really are trash." Qin Yu's lips twitched. But before he could speak, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him and fell to his knees. Little Black greets Master. What did it mean to choke with sobs and be on the verge of tears? Today, Qin Yu had experienced it for himself. This short sentence was enough to express his sorrow. At the same time, he let out a sigh of relief. Since the Eye of Eternal Night really was one of the lost subordinates of the ruler, then today's matters were much simpler. As he thought of those 5 dark true sages that were filled with killing intent and had an incomparably tyrannical aura, Qin Yu sighed inwardly and mourned for them for 3 seconds. With the help of this strongest traitor, killing them would be a very, very simple matter. The Saint Slaughter mission had ended, and he could even complete it more than expected. This was probably what they meant by plans not being able to keep up with changes. Little Black, why are you here? As the sun and moon intertwined, a phantom appeared. Qin Yu secretly wiped away a cold sweat for the eye of eternal night. It was one of the dignified, supreme treasures of the dark world, and yet it had such a depressing name. If it was forgotten by others, that would truly be embarrassing. The eye of eternal night was extremely excited, as if to be remembered was already a supreme honor. It respectfully said, "After the great changes of the past, Master disappeared, and I fell into the hands of the Western wilderness. Because of my own abilities, I was exiled to the broken world of the Southwestern wilderness. I thought that I would never see Master again in this life, but I never imagined that I would meet you again today." What callousness, what indifference! All of that had disappeared. All that was left was the excitement of finally seeing its master again. "Master, please allow me to continue to follow by your side. I will swear on my spirituality that I will dedicate everything to you." Qin Yu felt a chill crawl down his spine. He thought that this fellow, the Eye of Eternal Night, was definitely a fanatic believer of that woman. As if sensing something, the figure formed by the Eye of Eternal Night fiercely turned its head and glared at Qin Yu. But soon, it seemed to think of something and its eyes stiffened. "Master, it's as you think. I'm old and my eyesight isn't too good, so I can only reluctantly make do." After a simple sentence, the ruler clearly didn't intend to explain any further. She lightly said, "Since you're here, I don't think I need to clean up after you." She yawned, as if she had been sleeping just now. She turned and was about to leave when she suddenly thought of something. After a period of time, Qin Yu will need to help me with something. You should have a way to smoothly send him into the desolate region, right? The Eye of Eternal Night's body trembled with excitement. It loudly said, "Master, rest assured that your will be realized." "Very good, then I'll be leaving." With that, she turned and walked away. Pooh, pooh. With 2 muffled sounds, the sun and moon phantoms were extinguished. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This ruler was really narrow-minded. Humph. Although you'd better maintain a certain level of respect towards Master. The Eye of Eternal Night frowned. Although its tone was still cold, there was a hint of caution in it. Qin Yu could confirm that this was indeed the case. He thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Eye of Eternal Night, in the future, without my permission, you are not to probe my thoughts." There was a moment of silence. Just as Qin Yu thought that his probing had failed and he was inevitably feeling a bit awkward, the Eye of Eternal Night stiffened and bowed. Yes, it was full of resentment and unwillingness, but it had actually succeeded. Qin Yu felt a trace of excitement in his heart, but also a bit of fear. Thinking back to the conversation between the Eye of Eternal Night and that woman, he was about to speak. Just now, he only had time to say 2 words before he was interrupted by the Eye of Eternal Night. "I won't explain anything that Master hasn't said." Qin Yu was stifled. He humphed coldly and said, "I said just now, without my permission, you are not to probe my thoughts." The Eye of Eternal Night paused. It stiffly said, "Starting from now." Qin Yu glanced at it. Although he hadn't obtained the information he wanted, being able to protect the safety of his thoughts was an unexpected harvest. Moreover, through this matter, Qin Yu could faintly grasp the correct position he had in his communication with the Eye of Eternal Night. "I have taken the initiative. I ask and you answer. It doesn't involve His Excellency, but this matter is related to the mission in the future. You had better not hold back." The Eye of Eternal Night said, "I will act according to the situation." Qin Yu ignored its weak resistance and raised a finger. First question. What is the relationship between the Dark World and Western Desolation? What is the background behind its establishment? The Eye of Eternal Night glanced at him and said lightly, Western Desolation has never given up its ambition to occupy the Southwest Desolation. Moreover, the only passage to enter is in Western Desolation. Thus, this matter was tacitly approved by all parties. The passage to the broken world of the Southwest Desolation is not wide enough for true saints and above to pass through. The Dark World was established so that experts could descend at the last moment in case of emergencies. Chinyu frowned. That's it, the Eye of Eternal Night said. The Dark World is the frontline fortress. Western Desolation has always been researching the possibility of strengthening the passage and allowing true saints and above to descend. However, this matter is very difficult, and there hasn't been much progress until now. Chinyu was secretly shocked. Luckily, Western Desolation didn't succeed. Otherwise, if a large number of true saints descended upon vast Sun City, they would be able to sweep away all the other forces. Not to mention, above true saints were the Half-Emperor realm and even stronger existences. Chinyu's thoughts raced. Second question. What realm is the Half-Emperor realm? The Eye of Eternal Night frowned. Your mission involves the Emperor realm? Chinyu said, Answer my question. After a moment of silence, the Eye of Darkness said in a muffled voice, The Emperor realm is the realm above true saints. It is the true peak of the desolation. If it involves this realm, after leaving this place, you better not ask too many questions. Otherwise, it is likely that you will be discovered. There was actually such an amazing ability. He had to pay extra attention in the future. Chinyu quickly raised a third finger. One last question. Oh, I'll keep it for now. If there is a need in the future, I will ask you again. Could there be such a thing? The Eye of Eternal Night's breathing became heavy. It gritted its teeth and said, Since there are no more questions, then let's discuss the matter of you entering the Dark World. Chinyu raised an eyebrow. Why do I have to enter the Dark World? The Eye of Eternal Night said, As I said before, there is only one passage that connects the Desolation region to this place. The other end is in the Dark World. If you want to enter the Desolation region and complete the Master's mission, you can only go through this passage. Chinyu said, Don't tell me you don't know my relationship with the West Desolation. If I enter the Desolation region from the West Desolation, I will probably die as soon as I arrive. The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, You can change your appearance and aura. Chinyu glanced at the Eye of Eternal Night. This fellow seems to know a few things. It seems that it has been watching me for a long time. He rubbed his chin and sneered. I can deceive a true saint with my abilities, but it's hard to say what will happen if I go further. The West Desolation definitely has an Emperor Realm expert. Don't tell me that such an important passage isn't guarded by a super expert from the West Desolation. The Eye of Eternal Night said, There is indeed a half-emperor guarding it, but as long as you can obtain an item, it shouldn't be a problem for you to conceal yourself. Chinyu's eyes lit up. What item? If he could conceal his true appearance and aura in front of an Emperor Realm expert, then it would be much safer and easier to complete missions in the future. After all, according to the woman, what he was going to do next would definitely be carried out in the Desolation region. As expected, his premonition was accurate. Chinyu didn't have much time left in the vast Yang world. The Desolation region. According to his previous speculations, it would be an incomparably vast world with countless experts and endless opportunities. It was inevitable that Chinyu would feel uneasy. He also felt a headache from the difficulty of the mission, but he also felt a bit of anticipation in his heart. In the vast Yang world, countless experts fought for the position of ruler. It was like a sea of red that couldn't be any redder. If he could jump out of it, perhaps he would enter a completely different world. What's more, that clan was also in the Desolation region. Although Chinyu hadn't revealed his strong desire to know his identity all these years, since he had found a clue, he still had to investigate it thoroughly. Otherwise, it would be a bit too sad to live in this world without even knowing who one was or where one came from. Chapter 1436. Chinyu took a deep breath and collected his thoughts. He looked up at the other side. There was no point in thinking about this right now. It was better to determine how he could smoothly sneak into the desolate region. The Eternal Night said indifferently, the crown of the darkness ruler. He spoke calmly, his tone unruffled. Chinyu couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, a mixture of surprise and anger in his eyes. You mean the legendary darkness ruler of the world of darkness? The Eternal Night nodded. That's right. His crown is a supreme treasure of darkness. If you take it and combine it with your own abilities, you can guarantee that not even an Emperor Realm cultivator will be able to see through you. Chinyu rubbed his forehead, but he couldn't help but smile bitterly. For now, he would just pretend that the Eternal Night was right. The crown did have such an effect, but how was he going to take it? The Darkness Ruler, just the name alone was enough to prove himself. Moreover, if the world of darkness didn't have the ability to protect itself, would the rulers of the vast young world allow it to exist until now? Needless to say, the rulers hadn't sensed the Western Desolation's actions or intentions. There had to be some sort of trade or compromise involved. But whether it was trade or compromise, both sides needed to be on the same level in order to have a chance of proceeding. Putting down his hand, Chinyu took a deep breath. Let me ask you, what realm is the darkness ruler at? The Eternal Night said, Peak true saint. Chinyu frowned. Then let me put it another way. How strong can he be in the world of darkness? The Eternal Night paused. Comparable to a ruler. So it was like this. Chinyu glared at the Eternal Night. Could this bastard be trying to harm him out of jealousy? Comparable to a ruler. There was no need to say anything else. Trying to steal his crown was more like throwing away one's life. Chinyu had an annoyed expression. He lowered his voice and roared. You think this will work? The Eternal Night said, Since I have brought it up, there is a chance of success. He glanced at Chinyu. I'm not asking you to throw away your life. Bastard. Chinyu felt like this guy was peeping again. He gritted his teeth and sneered. I'd like to hear the details. The Eye of Eternal Night said, Actually, it's very simple. When the ruler of darkness is in the world of darkness, his strength is indeed comparable to a ruler's. However, when he comes out, his strength is at most slightly stronger than a peak true sage. Chinyu frowned. You have a way? The Eye of Eternal Night pointed at the thick, curtain-like darkness around them. Kill them. I'll make some arrangements that should be able to lure the ruler of darkness here. When that happens, you can make your move. Chinyu had an incredulous expression. You want me to kill him? The Eye of Eternal Night said indifferently, There's an aura hidden in your body. It's very powerful. He was probably referring to the Sword of the East Sea. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. He couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed in his heart. Why were these people able to sense this? Although it was good to scare people, if he revealed his trump card, he wouldn't have the chance to play dirty. A sword cry suddenly exploded in his mind. To put it simply, it probably meant that he was too weak and couldn't even conceal his aura. So how could he blame him? This was a sword that could not stand being wronged. Chinyu's complexion became increasingly ugly. He couldn't continue living like this. Was he the master, or was this sword the master? However, from the looks of it, he had to endure it for now. He could only slowly look for opportunities in the future. Suppressing his thoughts and calming himself down, Chinyu started to think about the Eye of Eternal Night's suggestion. First of all, killing the 5 Darkness True Sages was also Chinyu's request. Furthermore, from this angle, the two of them would be working together to lure and kill the Master of Darkness. This way, they wouldn't have to ask for help from the Eye of Eternal Night. Of course, this was just a small problem. The key was, what were the chances of winning against the Master of Darkness? If the Eye of Eternal Night was wrong or made a wrong judgment, and the Master of Darkness was lured here, not to mention killing others, he would probably have to hand over his head. Chinyu said in a deep voice, This matter is very important. I have to confirm again. Eye of Eternal Night, are you sure about everything you said? Of course. Will you help me? As soon as he asked this question, he saw a strange expression on the Eye of Eternal Night's face. If I don't work together with you, will I be watching you die? He was being looked down upon again. This fellow was truly indignant in his heart. He had always been indignant. Chinyu couldn't be bothered to argue with him. He still needed him to help out later. It wouldn't be too late to teach him a lesson after this matter was over. Mph. Your master isn't magnanimous, but does that mean that I am? Sooner or later, I will let you know that trouble comes from a loose tongue. Sneering coldly, Chinyu said expressionlessly, "Then, let's discuss what we should do next." The Eye of Eternal Night nodded. The thick darkness was like a curtain that covered the sky, blocking all vision and senses. Even as a darkness true sage, he was unable to determine the situation inside. Although the matter of killing Qin Yu today should be in the bag with His Excellency the Eye of Eternal Night's help, the progress is a little too slow. A long time had passed, but the resistance in the depths of the darkness was still there. The 5 darkness true sages couldn't help but frown. They thought that Qin Yu was too resistant. Just as they were puzzled and were about to ask, the Eye of Eternal Night's thought rippled in their minds. Qin Yu is about to die. 2 of you, come and deal with him. As he spoke, the thick darkness in front of him surged and revealed a passage. It was finally over. The 5 darkness true sages were overjoyed. They looked at each other and chose 2 people. They bowed and flew into the darkness. From afar, a figure appeared in front of the 2 darkness true sages. It was Qin Yu who was suppressed inside. At this moment, his face was pale, and he stood on the spot with his eyes closed. His aura had dissipated, and he looked like a pale corpse. At this moment, the 2 darkness rulers were enlightened. No wonder the progress was so slow. The Eye of Eternal Night wanted to ensure that his body was intact. That's right. With Qin Yu's strength, he could bring his body back to the darkness world and refine it into a powerful darkness puppet. By doing so, he would be able to gain more satisfaction and recognition from the West Wilderness. As they thought about it, the 2 darkness true sages approached Qin Yu quickly. However, at this moment, Qin Yu suddenly opened his eyes. There was a hint of mockery in his cold eyes. Not good. The 2 darkness true sages were shocked. Their reactions were extremely fast, and a violent force burst out of their bodies. However, at this moment, their bodies stiffened and the darkness Tao in their bodies became sluggish. Although it only lasted for a moment, it was enough for Qin Yu to take the lives of the 2 darkness true sages. Pooh! Pooh! 2 muffled sounds could be heard, and a bloody hole appeared between their eyebrows. Red and white matter spurted out, and the light in their eyes quickly disappeared. Killing a sage was extremely complicated. However, if one were to say that it was simple, it was also an extremely simple matter. At the end of the day, it depended on one's own strength. It was extremely difficult for a weak person to kill a sage. However, if one was strong enough, one only needed an opportunity and 2 simple fingers. If one's body was strong enough, one only needed an opportunity and 2 simple fingers. Of course, it was all thanks to the cooperation of the Eye of Eternal Night. If not, Qin Yu wouldn't have been able to do it so easily. The eyes of the 2 darkness true sages were filled with anger and fear. Obviously, they didn't expect that things would end up like this. One of the protectors of the darkness world, the powerful Eye of Eternal Night, would actually join hands with an outsider to plot against them. However, this was obviously the truth. After killing a true sage with each of his hands, Qin Yu squinted his eyes and looked at their corpses. As expected, before the 2 corpses fell to the ground, their bodies suddenly became fainter. It was as if they were being wiped by a powerful eraser. Immediately after, there was another round of wiping. Then, the corpses of the 2 true sages disappeared completely, as if they had never appeared. The corner of Qin Yu's eyes twitched. Of course, he knew that this was a faraway place. The mysterious existence hidden in time and space had taken away his sacrificial offerings. This kind of method was really mysterious. He saw it with his own eyes, but he couldn't detect any abnormal fluctuations. However, very quickly, Qin Yu frowned. He felt that something was wrong. Then, he reacted and his face turned gloomy. He felt that he had been taken advantage of. They had agreed that he would only sacrifice 1 complete true sage. However, 2 of them had been taken away. If it was in the past, he would have just taken them away. There were only dead people around him, and they were of no use to Chinyu. However, it was different now. He had obtained the blood jade coffin and the ghost cultivation method from the Avicii sage. Rare items like the souls of true sages could greatly increase his own strength. Damn it. As expected, there was something else hidden in the contract. The stone tower actually couldn't see through it. It was really useless. Very quickly, Chinyu's heart turned cold. He thought to himself, could there be something else in the contract? If he was schemed against again, it would be really troublesome. Stone tower, hurry up and come out. Master, don't worry. I guarantee that there are no other problems with the contract. The stone tower hurriedly spoke, as if it had guessed Chinyu's thoughts. As for the true sage corpses that were taken away, I ask Master not to be angry. These mysterious existences that hide in space-time have always been fair and reasonable. Since we have taken your things, we will definitely pay you back in the future. Chinyu's heart calmed down. Are you sure? The stone tower said in a low voice. I am sure. Fortunately, if that was the case, it wasn't unacceptable. Before Chinyu could think further, the Eye of Eternal Night suddenly spoke. Mysterious existences that hide in space-time? Its voice was filled with dread. It was clear that it had a certain understanding of these existences. Chinyu, I must remind you that it is best to stay far away from them. Although these existences are extremely powerful and have all sorts of inconceivable methods, most of them are crazy. If you come into contact with them too much, there will definitely be big problems. This should be a kind reminder. Chinyu took a deep breath and waved his hand. Don't worry, I know what I am doing. There are still 3 outside. Continue. Seeing that he didn't respond, the Eye of Eternal Night furrowed its eyebrows but didn't say anything else. After all, it was the person chosen by its master. It was only natural that it would receive its master's protection. And compared to its master, these mysterious and powerful existences weren't anything at all. The third ruler of darkness received an order from the Eye of Eternal Night. He was to enter the darkness and help the other 2 to deal with this. Just what was the problem? Didn't they say that Chinyu was about to die? Could it be that the 2 rulers of darkness couldn't clean up the scene? As this person was thinking, his consciousness suddenly froze. In the next moment, he fell into eternal darkness. Chapter 1437. The curtain of darkness was a manifestation of the power of the Eye of Eternal Night. It was enough to hide the eyes of a sage. Thus, the 2 darkness true sages who were left outside were puzzled. At this moment, the curtain of darkness in front of them moved. The darkness true sage who had just entered walked out with a gloomy face. Seeing his expression, the expressions of the 2 darkness true sages changed. They hurried over. What happened? The darkness true sage smiled bitterly. Both of you. There is indeed a problem. That Chinyu has another. As he spoke, he had already approached the 2 of them. At this moment, the 2 darkness true sages in front of them suddenly froze. The darkness true sage who walked out struck out with his hands like lightning. With a series of muffled sounds, a hole appeared between their eyebrows. In front of their eyes that were filled with disbelief and fear, Chinyu's figure changed and revealed his true appearance. He watched as the 2 corpses quickly faded and disappeared. 5 darkness true sages, the pinnacle existences of the vast Yang world. Even though their positions were slightly shaken because of the arrival of the ruler, they were still absolute powerhouses, and they were all killed just like that. Even though these people died in his hands, Chinyu couldn't help but have a strange thought. It turned out that killing a sage could really be so simple. However, this also proved the power of the Eye of Eternal Night. Such a powerful Eye of Eternal Night was only second in the darkness world. One could imagine how terrifying the ruler of darkness was. It was definitely not an easy task to kill him. If he was not careful, he might lose his life. As Chinyu's heart trembled, the cold voice of the Eye of Eternal Night sounded. Get ready. I'm going to lure the ruler of darkness to descend. So straightforward. There's no need to think anymore. He felt that it was a little rash for the 2 of them to make a decision on such an important matter after a hasty discussion. However, it was obvious that the Eye of Eternal Night didn't think so. It only reminded Chinyu and had no intention of discussing. Rumble. The surrounding darkness suddenly surged violently like a tide. A ruthless and dense aura instantly shot up to the sky. At this moment, the illusion that covered the Heavenly Sword sect was as fragile as a mirror. It was easily smashed into pieces. Boundless darkness surged out from within like a broken dam. It swept out with a whistling sound and instantly covered a radius of a few hundred miles. The darkness was as thick and viscous as ink. At this moment, it roared and spun, releasing a terrifying aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. Xian Ji's eyes widened, and her pale face was filled with horror. Cold sweat instantly gushed out from her body, drenching her robe. It naturally didn't feel good when it stuck to her body, but at this time, she was no longer in the mood to think about it. What a terrifying power of darkness! It was as though the eternal night was devouring everything in its path. It was fortunate that she was far away from it. Otherwise, if she were to be devoured by it, just the thought of it made her break out in cold sweat. Thinking about how Mr. Ninth was among them, even though he was certain that he possessed great strength, he still couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. However, this matter was obviously not something that she was qualified to intervene in. Xianji bit her lips, got up, and continued to retreat. And at the same time, in the world where the Heavenly Sword sect was, almost all the powerful cultivators felt the terrifying aura coming from here. Raising their heads in shock, countless gazes gathered on them. However, none of them dared to come forward to take a look. Of course, just by sensing the fluctuations of this level of power from afar, one could not help but feel despair. Why should I go over there? Courting death. In the world of darkness, one couldn't even see their own fingers in front of them. This was an eternal melody. On the vast, silent, desolate plains, the great hall that had completely blended into the darkness stood there quietly. The mountains around it that were piled up with sand were like a giant shackle that sealed it here. Suddenly, this grand hall that had stood there for countless years began to gently tremble. Hum, hum, a sound spread out in the darkness. A figure slowly appeared in the grand hall. He wore luxurious and loose robes that hid his entire body. He gave off an endlessly mysterious and powerful feeling. But at this time, if someone were to really look at him, they would only see an endless abyss. Because he was the incarnation of darkness in the world. Shua, within the grand hall, a figure opened his eyes. His eyes were indifferent and calm, without the least bit of light surging within them. There wasn't the least bit of aura circulating within them. However, right at this moment, countless cracks suddenly appeared on the towering mountain that surrounded the hall, which was made up of sand that was blown over by the wind. There were so many of them that it was hard to calculate. They were like countless blades, or like arrows on a taut bowstring, waiting to be released. All of their auras were locked onto the figure that appeared in the grand hall. His expression was calm, as if he didn't sense any of this at all, or as if he were already used to this scene. But thinking about it, the latter was more likely to be the case. He calmly waited. The cracks that appeared in the mountain range outside the grand hall seemed to sense something or obtain permission. Quietly, all the cracks vanished, as if that scene just now had been nothing but an illusion. The person in the grand hall certainly knew that this wasn't an illusion, but a method that the Western Desolate had laid down to imprison him. It had been many years since he had the chance to take a single step out, and he didn't know when he would be able to obtain true freedom. A fluctuation appeared in his eyes before immediately disappearing. The person in the grand hall took a step forwards. Then, like a phantom, he vanished from sight. Where the Heavenly Sword sect was, the endless darkness shook like a tide. As Chinyu calmly waited, time slowly passed. There was no movement. There was no movement. There was still no movement. Just as Chinyu thought that the Eye of Eternal Night had boasted too much and that his plan to lure him had failed, it suddenly said, "He's here." There was no warning. These two simple words, but the meaning contained within them left one's heart trembling. It indicated that today's situation had begun. Either Qin Yu could join forces with the Eye of Eternal Night and smoothly kill the Darkness Sovereign and take his crown, or they would be killed here. He hoped that the Eye of Eternal Night wasn't boasting, and he also hoped that the Sword of the Eastern Sea could help. Qin Yu suddenly discovered that his own strength didn't seem to have any decisive effect in this matter. This was a cold and ironic truth. Qin Yu bitterly smiled, but this thought only spun for a moment before it was suppressed in his heart. At this step, any extra thoughts were just a waste of energy. Bang! With a loud explosion, the skies above the heavenly sword sect suddenly shattered. At this moment, yin and yang seemed to reverse. Darkness swallowed everything. Even the great sun, hanging high above, disappeared without a trace. The Darkness Sovereign had arrived. At this moment, Qin Yu felt as if his five senses had been sealed off. Not only was everything pitch black in front of him, but his ears had fallen into absolute silence. It was like he had been exiled to a completely isolated space. Fortunately, this feeling only lasted for a moment. The Eye of Eternal Night's voice sounded out. "Since you know this is a trap, why did you jump in on your own initiative?" Just as the voice entered his ears, Qin Yu's heart shrank. A strong restlessness gushed out from the depths of his heart. His first thought was that he was done for. Since the other party knew everything, it was clear that he had lifted a stone to smash his own foot. Another voice sounded out. It was quiet and peaceful, like a gentle night. It caused one's mind to relax and their eyelids to begin to struggle. Qin Yu fiercely bit the tip of his tongue, using the pain to struggle free. He hurriedly guarded his mind, but he was even more horrified. The Darkness Sovereign. This was the Darkness Sovereign. Just his voice alone possessed such terrifying might. "Because only now can I take the initiative to attack you. Today is a trap, but it is also the chance I've been waiting for." He paused for a moment and then chuckled. "If I swallow you, perhaps I will be able to break through the shackles placed on me by the Western Desolation." The Eye of Eternal Night's voice was faint. "You can give it a try." Bang! Wild fluctuations of strength instantly erupted. Two terrifying strengths wildly collided. The place where Qin Yu was standing was clearly protected by the Eye of Eternal Night, so he wasn't affected. But even so, it was enough for him to clearly sense exactly how terrifying the two forces brazenly fighting outside were. Was this what the Eye of Darkness meant when it said it was stronger than a peak true saint? Bah, you bastard. Your words are far too unreliable. The two were not even on the same level. Okay. The only consolation was that the Eye of Eternal Night was far stronger than Qin Yu had imagined. It was actually able to face the tyrannical Darkness Sovereign head-on. Just as this thought appeared in Qin Yu's mind, his complexion suddenly changed. Because at this moment, the Eye of Eternal Night's voice sounded. "I was seriously injured and haven't fully recovered. At most, I can only hold on for a moment. Prepare to attack." Qin Yu thought of the Eye of Eternal Night being forcefully summoned in the world Zeroth. It was clearly referring to that time. Bastard. Since he knew that his injuries hadn't fully recovered, why did he have to force himself? Was it really so important to show his face in front of that woman? Whatever, if he couldn't deal with it, he would just summon that woman. With the power of the ruler, it shouldn't be difficult to suppress the Darkness Sovereign. "We can do this. There is no need to disturb, Master." The Eye of Eternal Night's calm voice sounded. "I think you will agree with my point of view." Qin Yu's body stiffened. He felt a strong sense of malice. It was as if as long as he dared to shake his head, someone would immediately give up and give him another mark. At that time, he wouldn't even have the chance to summon the sun and moon phantoms and summon that woman. He would be directly targeted. Crazy, the Eye of Eternal Night was absolutely crazy. In order to obtain that woman's approval, it was actually willing to do such a brainless thing. But Qin Yu was sure that it really wanted to do so, and it could do it. Was he being controlled by a madman? Bastard. Qin Yu's complexion was ashen. But this moment, he could only grit his teeth and accept it. If he fought it out first, he might be able to successfully kill the Darkness Sovereign. If he really couldn't do it in the end, it wouldn't be too late to take the risk. He didn't believe that the eye of eternal night would still stop him from asking for help when he was at the end of the line. Even if it was a madman, there should be a limit to how brainless it was. Otherwise, it would just fall out with him. You win. He gritted his teeth and roared. The feeling of working together that he had felt when he easily killed the 5 sages just now had completely disappeared. "I have eternal night, you bastard, just you wait. Don't ever give me a chance. Otherwise, I will definitely let you know what regret feels like." Chapter 1438. Making up his mind was ultimately a depressing and powerless thing, because it was of no help to the current situation. He could only vent his emotions and place his hopes on the future. However, no one in this world knew what the future would be like. More importantly, Chinyu wasn't sure if he had a future. He really wanted to curse out loud. However, Chinyu was trying his best to resist the urge to curse out loud. What he should be thinking about right now was how to survive, because only by staying alive would he have a future. Chinyu took a deep breath and suppressed his emotions. The great Tao that he had condensed using the power of the furnace in his body was activated with a light hum. Back in the Zeroth world, Chinyu had been forced to slash out with his sword. Its power was so great that even the ruler's will avatar that had fused with Yao Tao was sent flying. At that time, the great Tao in Chinyu's body was only 5% complete, so it was far from being comparable to the complete great Tao today. Therefore, Chinyu knew that the power of the next sword would be very strong, but he wasn't sure how strong it would be. After all, this should be the first time that the Sword of the East Sea had displayed its true power in this world. Hum! A subtle sword hum sounded in Chinyu's mind. It was obscure and deep, but there was a hint of anticipation in it. Clearly, after being silent for countless years, the sword was tired of living like a pool of stagnant water. It hoped to stir up some water. Chinyu had used the furnace to condense his great Tao, so he could barely control it. Therefore, not only was Chinyu full of anticipation for this sword, but the Sword of the East Sea itself was also filled with excitement. I wonder if my sword gleam is still sharp after so many years of not fighting? The Eye of Eternal Night was really an honest person. It said that it couldn't hold on for too long, and it really couldn't. The surging darkness suddenly showed a trace of stiffness. Although it was just a flash, it was a fatal flaw for a powerful existence of this level. A light laugh sounded. It was the ruler of darkness who hadn't shown his face yet. His voice was filled with delight and anticipation, as if he could already see the Eye of Eternal Night being killed on the spot. Chinyu's mind was tense, but his face was calm. He didn't reveal any panic. The reason was simple. He didn't believe that the Eye of Eternal Night, which had been so confident just a moment ago, would be destroyed so easily. Sure enough, the next moment, its voice sounded in his ear. Now, Chinyu had already gathered his strength and was waiting. Now that he had nowhere to retreat to, he could only choose to believe in the judgment of the Eye of Eternal Night. With a growl, he stepped forward. The ground beneath his feet shook, and countless cracks spread out in all directions like a dense spider web. He raised his hand and grasped forward. A sword shadow suddenly appeared, and in just half a breath's time, it turned from illusory to solid. The edge of the sword trembled slightly, and a formless aura flowed out and entered the void, directly cutting it into pieces. At this moment, the great Tao within Qin Yu's body suddenly cried out. It was like it had been ruthlessly struck by a club, directly breaking his bones and spine. Kacha! Kacha! The sound of shattering metal entered Qin Yu's ears like billowing thunderclaps. It made his chest feel heavy and stifled, making it hard for him to breathe. He wished he could spit out a mouthful of blood. Qin Yu guessed that the collapse of the great Tao would cause damage to him, but the degree of the backlash was far stronger than he imagined. His field of vision darkened and his vision blurred. Luckily, Qin Yu didn't need to open his eyes to lock onto the aura of the ruler of darkness. The ruler of darkness was like an endless abyss that contained nearly all of the darkness in the world. Qin Yu's vision began to darken and his vision began to blur. Luckily, he didn't need to open his eyes to lock onto the aura of the darkness ruler. The other party was like an endless abyss that contained nearly all of the darkness in the world. But today he was stronger than when he was in World Zero. Yu bit down on his pitiful tongue and barely managed to keep his consciousness clear. It wasn't like before when he couldn't even see how his sword slashed out. But today he was much stronger than when he was in World Zero. He bit down on the tip of his pitiful tongue and barely managed to maintain a clear mind. At least he wouldn't be like before where he couldn't even clearly see how his sword slashed out. His great Tao had shattered, which meant that Peach Girl had lost the ability to continue living. He wondered if eldest senior apprentice brother had woken up. His great Tao had shattered, which meant that Peach Girl had lost the ability to prolong her life. Had eldest senior apprentice brother woken up? The letter he left behind would be discovered very soon. Eldest senior apprentice brother had woken up. Not too long after Yu left, the Peach Garden's chief disciple finally managed to overcome the difficulty of breaking and establishing his great Tao. He had survived with great difficulty. The great Tao had collapsed, and a true saint had perished. This was Vast Yang's will. Although the existence of the Great Furnace had given eldest senior apprentice brother a chance to defy the heavens and change his fate, there were still countless dangers. Thus, the sleeping eldest senior apprentice brother situation was far more serious than Yu had described. It was only because of his trust in the Great Furnace and his trust in eldest senior apprentice brothers that he remained calm. In short, eldest senior apprentice brother had survived. The process of breaking and establishing his great Tao had thoroughly stabilized his cultivation. Like this, besides Yu, an unspecialized saint, the Peach Garden now had another true saint guarding it. The Peach Garden fell into a period of celebration. As the news spread out, the crowds of people outside the Peach Garden multiplied by several times. The Peach Garden's Miss Ninth was able to kill Saint Zhou and Saint Lin with a single move. Her strength was tyrannical and could deter the 9 heavens and 10 earths. Moreover, the mysterious and unfathomable Peach Garden's chief disciple had broken through 2 realms and become a true saint. His strength had risen to another level. This was what it meant to have 2 true saints in one sect. This made the people of the world sigh with emotion. They thought that the destiny of the Peach Garden was truly unfathomable. They had thought that with the fall of the Garden Master, the Peach Garden would decline from its peak of prosperity. Then, a great calamity descended upon the world, and it seemed that the Peach Garden would be destroyed. However, after a short period of time, not only had the Peach Garden not declined, but it had also taken advantage of the situation to advance further. Its power and status were even stronger than when the Garden Master had been alive. But while the people of the outside world were sighing with emotion, the Peach Garden had fallen into a panic without warning. The cause was that Peach Maiden had suddenly vomited blood. Her aura was rapidly dispersing, and it gave people a feeling that she was reaching the end of her life and would die at any moment. The maidservants serving her screamed in terror. They knew that if something happened to Peach Maiden, none of them would be able to escape. The first to learn of the news was Lei Xiaoyu. Her first reaction was to inform her eldest senior apprentice brother. The means of a true saint were naturally trustworthy. Then, she went straight to Qin Yu's courtyard. Big brother Qin was engaged to senior sister Peach Maiden, and everyone knew how much he cared about her. Now that something like this had happened, she had to inform him as soon as possible. Then, she discovered that Qin Yu, who had announced to the outside world that he was in closed-door cultivation, was no longer in the Peach Garden. He had disappeared once again. Luckily, there was a letter on the table, but it was written that only when eldest senior apprentice brother was present could they open it. Secretly rejoicing that she had already informed her eldest senior apprentice brother, Lei Xiaoyu picked up the letter and hurried to Peach Maiden's residence. By now, all the disciples of the Peach Garden who were not in closed-door cultivation had arrived. Bai Feng frowned and asked, "Where is little senior apprentice brother?" Lei Xiaoyu smiled bitterly. "Third senior apprentice brother, big brother Qin, has already left the Peach Garden. I don't know where he is now." At this moment, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She stared at Peach Maiden's courtyard, and an intense uneasiness surged in her heart. Finally, it turned into a single thought. Senior Sister Peach Maiden suddenly vomited blood and showed signs of life-threatening. Could this be related to Chinyu? As soon as she thought of this, her uneasiness deepened. Lei Xiaoyu suddenly thought of the letter in her hand and hurriedly said, "Where is eldest senior apprentice brother? Big brother Qin has a letter for him." "I'm here." A calm and gentle voice echoed out. The space in front of them twisted, and the eldest senior apprentice brother walked out. His expression was calm as before, not revealing much panic. At this time, this Peach Garden's chief disciple was displaying a sufficiently calm demeanor. But he had to use a void-shifting technique to cross just a few steps. This in itself was a clear indication of his true emotional state. Lei Xiaoyu hurriedly handed the letter to him. After the eldest senior apprentice brother opened it, his complexion changed for a moment before he composed himself. With a bit of strength in his fingers, the letter turned to dust. Then he swept his eyes over everyone. "I have an understanding of Junior Apprentice Sister Peach Maiden's situation. You all go out and wait. There won't be any problems." Bai Feng relaxed. She cupped her hands together and said, "If so, then I'll have to trouble eldest senior apprentice brother." He turned to leave, but he discovered that Lei Xiaoyu was still standing where she was. Just as she was about to say something, he frowned, a look of surprise on his face. Lei Xiaoyu's face was full of worry, as if she knew something. She bit her lips and asked, "Eldest senior apprentice brother, is this related to Big Brother Qin?" The eldest senior apprentice brother knew that she had a close relationship with Chinyu, but in the current situation, there was no time to explain. He gently said, "I will go and save her first. You all go out." Sometimes, not answering was in fact an answer. Lei Xiaoyu paled. She bowed and walked out. Bai Feng was secretly startled. Junior apprentice Sister Peach Maiden had an accident, so why was it related to youngest senior apprentice brother? But since the eldest senior apprentice brother didn't say anything, it wasn't good for him to ask. He chased after Lei Xiaoyu, wanted to find out more from her mouth. The gates to Peach Maiden's courtyard closed. Before Bai Feng could speak, Lei Xiaoyu bitterly smiled and shook her head. "Third senior apprentice brother, I only have a guess. I don't know the inside story, so let's wait for eldest senior apprentice brother to come out first." Peach Maiden finally regained her senses. The first thing she said was that something had happened to Chinyu. The eldest senior apprentice brother, who already knew the inside story, sighed inwardly. "Junior apprentice sister, there is no need to worry. My great Tao was also on the verge of collapse, but I was still saved by youngest senior apprentice brother. If it was him, there would naturally be no problem." Although he said this, deep in his heart, there was still a bit of restlessness. It had to be known that there was a great difference between the imminent collapse of the Great Tao and the complete collapse of the Great Tao. As for the collapse of the Great Tao and the death of saints, this was an ironclad law that had never changed since ancient times. As for what his youngest senior apprentice brother's situation was, he didn't have any assurance at all. Peach Maiden clearly realized this. A complex expression appeared on her face, but she immediately restrained herself and closed her eyes, no longer speaking. The eldest senior apprentice brother gently sighed. He wiped away the beads of sweat that had appeared on his pale face. He told his junior apprentice sister to rest well, and then turned and left. He glanced at Bai Feng and then at Lei Xiaoyu. After a moment of silence, he said, "Something did indeed happen to youngest senior apprentice brother, but I believe he will definitely return safely." The first reason he made this judgment was because of the existence of the Great Furnace. There is actually such a divine object in this world that could reverse the collapse of the Great Tao. Secondly, since Chinyu had left a letter ahead of time, it could be seen that he had already expected this. With Chinyu's methods and wisdom, if he had expected this, he would surely have made preparations. Perhaps all of this was within his considerations. Suppressing these thoughts, the eldest senior apprentice brother glanced back at Peach Maiden's courtyard. A complex look appeared in his eyes. He finally realized that there was actually such an inside story behind why his honorable master had perished. And in order to save Peach Maiden, his youngest senior apprentice brother was actually willing to do such a thing, the sincerity of his feelings was truly moving. Before today, even though Qin Yu had done so much for Peach Garden and even rescued it from the brink of destruction, the eldest senior apprentice brother could still feel that there had always been a trace of estrangement between him and Peach Garden. This left him feeling a bit restless. But now, this restlessness had completely vanished. His youngest senior apprentice brother could be trusted. He could only hope that he could return safely soon. Beside him, Baifeng frowned. Although he didn't know the inside story, he could already guess that Peach Maiden was related to Qin Yu today. Beside him, Lei Xiaoyu subconsciously bit her lips, a dazed look in her eyes. It was unknown just what she was thinking. Like a bolt of thunder, it pierced through the layers of clouds, descending from the highest heavens and cutting into the endless dark abyss. There was a pain cough. It could be seen that even someone as strong as the Darkness Chief Sovereign would inevitably be injured in the face of this sword strike that came at the cost of shattering his own great Tao. But this also meant that the best result of killing the enemy with a single sword strike had already fallen through. And at the same time, the Eye of Eternal Night that had deliberately revealed a flaw to draw the Darkness Chief Sovereign into attacking and create a chance for Qin Yu to attack also seized this opportunity. Rumble, rumble. Where the Heavenspan Sword sect was located, all of the darkness rapidly gathered. It surged in from all directions and was cleanly swallowed up. And all of this happened in an instant. In the blink of an eye, night turned into day. The great sun above their heads seemed to be taking revenge. It released an even more dazzling light. It illuminated Qin Yu's half-kneeling figure and also illuminated his pale face that lacked the slightest hint of blood. The sword in his hand had long since vanished. A faint sword cry echoed in his ears, filled with anger and unwillingness. It was clear that he was dissatisfied with his first strike just now. I've almost been sucked dry by you, and yet you still think I'm trash. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. He gathered his thoughts and looked up. It had to be known that although he had already drawn out his sword, and the Eye of Eternal Night had also taken advantage of this opportunity to attack, this seemingly short, but actually terrifying battle had yet to truly come to an end. In other words, it was still unknown just who would be the final victor and who would be the one laughing in the end. The first thing that entered everyone's eyes was a person wearing voluminous robes. His entire body was covered up, and he gave off an unfathomable and mysterious feeling. But now his chest and abdomen had been brutally cut open. A long wound had been torn open and his robes were hanging down, revealing a fierce and ferocious mouth. Blood recklessly gushed out, dyeing his body a deep scarlet. No matter how great of a master he was, he still appeared distressed and distressed. The only pity was that he couldn't see the true appearance of the Darkness Chief Sovereign. It was unknown just what sort of expression he would have after being struck by this sword. Chapter 1439. But soon, Qin Yu changed his mind. He discovered that even if this darkness ruler didn't wear a robe that covered his figure, he still wouldn't be able to see his appearance. This was because at this moment, as the darkness was retracted and the darkness ruler was exposed to the light, he actually began to burn. That's right, the flames suddenly rose without any warning and directly engulfed his entire body. It wasn't that flames appeared out of nowhere, but that the darkness ruler couldn't withstand the heat of the dazzling sunlight that fell down from above. Or it could be said that when his flesh and blood touched the light, he was set aflame. Thinking about it, this was the method of the Eye of Eternal Night. No wonder the moment the darkness ruler arrived, it was like a polar night had arrived, causing the entire world to be covered in a thick darkness. Not many people knew of this secret, but the Eye of Eternal Night just happened to be one of them. Qin Yu's heart calmed. After being struck by my Tao-shattering sword, even a true ruler wouldn't feel good, much less a fake like you. Now that the curtain of darkness had been lifted and he was exposed to the sunlight, his entire body was burning up. Could he still make a comeback? His thoughts subconsciously raced, but for some unknown reason, A faint sense of unease appeared in Qin Yu's heart. It was as if he had overlooked something important, and this matter itself should be related to the scene before him. Just as he was frowning and his thoughts raced, a calm voice suddenly sounded out, calm and gentle like the night. It was the darkness ruler who had spontaneously combusted. When darkness reaches its peak, light will naturally be born. I thought you already knew such a simple truth. But now it seems that you still haven't understood this point. What a pity. Qin Yu's heart shrank. He finally realized why he had such restless emotions just now. Light and darkness were two sides of the same coin. As someone who controlled both sides, he actually hadn't thought of this in time. This was a huge mistake. Who was this person in front of him? The incomparably powerful darkness ruler. In the world of darkness that was controlled by the Western wilderness, he was a formidable character that could rival the vast sun ruler. Just this alone was sufficient to show that this person's attainments in the way of darkness had reached the pinnacle. One didn't need to be a genius to know that Qin Yu was far from being able to compare with him. Otherwise, he would have become the incarnation of darkness, an existence that seemed like an abyss. If so, then there would be no need to worry about the ruler of darkness. Since even he could comprehend the integration of light and darkness and grasp it, why couldn't the ruler of darkness? The other party's ability was probably far above his own. In other words, the Lord of Darkness, who seemed to be spontaneously combusting and was about to be struck to the ground, had not actually suffered a fatal blow. The trump card that the Eye of Eternal Night had prepared all this time had completely missed its mark. As if to confirm Qin Yu's thoughts, the burning flesh and blood on the surface of the Dark Ruler's body rapidly turned into charred dregs and fell to the ground. The flames also fell and extinguished. The person who reappeared in front of Qin Yu was a slightly thinner young man. His skin was pale, as if he had never seen the sun before. He was incomparably handsome, and there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. At this moment, he suddenly raised his hand and clenched it. The void trembled, and a round bead appeared. It was pitch black without any impurities, as if it was formed from the darkest night in the world. The round bead trembled continuously as it was pinched by the fair, delicate fingers, trying to break free. Silently, tiny cracks appeared on the fingers of the handsome young man, and the red flesh and blood inside could be seen. I have eternal night. You and I have known each other for a long time, and we do have some understanding of each other. Although it seems like you don't know much about me now, to be honest, I do know you very well. In order to expose me to the light of day, you forcefully absorbed all the darkness in this world in an instant. It must feel bad to eat too much, right? But it doesn't matter. I will release you very soon. After saying that, he swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night in one gulp, as if he had put a grape into his mouth. This scene made Qin Yu's eyelids twitch. He thought to himself, is this the end of the Eye of Eternal Night? This is a little too **ket up. Before Qin Yu could sigh or curse, he suddenly felt his entire body turn cold. Then, he could not help but feel frightened and fearful. He looked up and saw that the ruler of darkness, who had swallowed the Eye of Eternal Night in one gulp, was now looking at him with a faint smile. His posture was very calm. Peach Garden's Miss Ninth. Actually, you should have thought of this long ago. Only a powerful figure like you, who suddenly rose up like a comet, would have the courage to break the established situation and attack the Western wilderness and the other races. A clan brazenly attacked without any regard for the consequences. He looked Qin Yu up and down, looking at him very seriously. The smile on the corner of his mouth became wider and wider. A body of rules, a powerful divine seal condensed by the true God Tao, and some other things that even I can't see clearly. As expected, Miss Ninth is also hiding many secrets. Under normal circumstances, given enough time, based on Miss Ninth's growth trajectory, perhaps you would soon be on par with me. But it's a pity that you expose yourself too early. You can only blame yourself for not being cautious enough. At this point, the ruler of darkness licked his lips, and his eyes suddenly flashed. Don't you think it's strange that I'm talking so much to you? Qin Yu thought for a moment and said, I should be stalling for time. Such a simple logic. When he swallowed the eye of eternal night just now, he did it cleanly and cleanly. How could his personality suddenly change so much? The ruler of darkness, who was extremely handsome a few years ago, and anyone who saw him would praise him, now had a look of admiration in his eyes. I admit that I can't see through you anymore. Since you know you are stalling for time, you still dare to let me do what I want. He shook his head and said, if the situation were different, or if I had already broken the shackles, perhaps I would spare your life. After all, there aren't many smart people in this world. It would be a pity to kill you like this. At this point, it was clearly about to end. It seemed that he had already suppressed the resistance from the eye of eternal night. Darkness quietly bloomed around Qin Yu's body. The edges of the darkness wriggled, like a large black flower that had suddenly bloomed. It was clear that even though he had comprehended light and darkness as one, as the ruler of darkness, he still instinctively preferred to use the abilities of darkness. Qin Yu stuffily coughed, and his eyes instantly turned pitch black. The reason he cooperated despite knowing that the other party was stalling for time was because he needed time to sort out the chaos and backlash from the collapse of the great Tao within his body. Only then would he be able to mobilize his strength and fight for survival. Of course, Qin Yu was well aware that his chances of success were small. But from the start, he had never thought of using his own strength to resist the eye of darkness. That was foolish and had no chance of success. But Qin Yu wasn't an idiot. What he wanted to do was temporarily resist the ruler of darkness' murderous attack. Then, he would latch onto the ruler's thigh. Bah! This was all because of that stupid eye of eternal night. If it weren't for the fact that it insisted on showing itself in front of the ruler and wasn't willing to swallow its own bragging, things wouldn't have reached this stage. If he followed Qin Yu's plan and summoned that woman, then even if the ruler of darkness was twice as strong, he would still be able to smash him to pieces with a single hand. As for now, humph, 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 he could only hope that the ruler of darkness' digestive abilities weren't as strong as his cultivation. Otherwise, even if the ruler smoothly descended, the eye of eternal night that he rescued would likely have turned into a giant lump. Just as Qin Yu's eyes turned pitch black and he was preparing to face the ruler of darkness head-on and then summon the woman, there was a muffled groan in front of him. The black flower that bloomed around him stiffened for a moment before withering and dispersing. Qin Yu was startled. He looked up and saw a soft hand reach out from the space in front of the ruler of darkness. Since it could be called soft, it was naturally an extremely beautiful hand. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but sigh in praise. Then his thoughts drifted away. He couldn't help but wonder just what sort of person the owner of such a beautiful pair of hands was. But right now, the ruler of darkness clearly wasn't in the mood to appreciate this small hand that suddenly appeared in front of him. There was a dignified look on his handsome face, and his pupils shrank. From the fact that he didn't hesitate to give up on controlling the power of darkness that swallowed Qin Yu, it could be seen that he was extremely anxious. And in fact, the ruler of darkness' subsequent actions proved this point. His figure retreated, but he didn't seem to be in a sorry state. He was like a duckweed that had been swept up by a strong wind and had a mysterious aura about him. His speed didn't seem fast, but in the blink of an eye, he was already far away. But his expression didn't relax at all. Instead, it became even more solemn. The reason was very simple. That extremely beautiful palm was like a shadow that followed the body and landed less than 3 inches away from his eyes. As long as one was a bit slower and the other was a bit faster, it would immediately cause the blood to splatter in all directions. Umph! The sovereign of darkness let out a muffled groan as he forced himself to come to a halt. At the same time, his head suddenly exploded into a vortex. This vortex was pitch black, and it stretched as far as the eye could see. It was connected to an unknown, terrifying place. When that beautiful hand was just a hair's breadth away from the vortex, it seemed to sense some threat, and it suddenly vanished from sight. Just like when it first appeared, there were no fluctuations at all. But in the next moment, that hand reappeared and pressed down on the ruler of darkness' chest. It happened to be the terrifying wound that had been cut open by the Tao-shattering version of the East Sea Sword. There was a light cracking sound that came from within the ruler of darkness' body. It was like a formidable strength had cracked open a solid object. The voice of the ruler of darkness suddenly echoed out from the vortex. But it seemed to come from far away, and the humming sound gave off an indistinct feeling. "You've been tricked." His words came to an abrupt halt. This was because the black blood that gushed out from the crack in his chest seemed to pass through the air as it landed on that pair of soft hands, not staining them in the slightest. What followed was a series of bell-like giggles. Chinyu felt a breath of air blow into his ear, as if someone were intimately leaning in. "What I owe you before is settled." A mysterious existence hidden within space-time. At this moment, through the fluctuations of the contract strength within his body, Chinyu was able to determine the identity of this person. Whether it was the stone pagoda or the Eye of Eternal Night, both of them were filled with dread and hostility towards them. But this beautiful hand and the voice in his ear seemed to indicate that this wasn't the case. Of course, none of this was important. Even if this mysterious existence was as beautiful as a fairy, it was impossible for Chinyu to have any relationship with her that exceeded the boundaries of a normal relationship. And there was one more thing. Chinyu discovered that within his body, the binding strength produced by the contract hadn't dissipated. Rather, it was like an external force was pouring into his body, making it much more stable. It was like he had been promoted from a temporary worker to a formal contract worker. Chinyu's mouth was a bit bitter, because this wasn't the result he wanted at all. Since the contract had been formed, wouldn't it be better for everyone to let go and go their separate ways? Why did they have to be tied together? The stone pagoda disappeared without a trace, clearly not prepared to explain. Of course, Chinyu didn't have the time to waste right now. Because he had suffered a palm strike from the mysterious existence hidden within space-time, the Dark Ruler's wounds had been severely wounded once more. His situation was clearly far from good. To put it in a cliché way, it would be to take advantage of his weakness to take his life. As Chinyu was thinking this, someone had already done so. It was clear that the consequences of the previous cracking sound were extremely serious. With a stuffy cough, the Dark Ruler stumbled. His chest and abdomen had ruptured, and a giant hole had appeared. But now not a single drop of blood flowed out from this hole. It was incomparably black, like a gaping maw. A terrifying, plundering strength erupted from the black hole, crazily absorbing the Dark Ruler's flesh and blood, wanting to completely swallow him. The one who had acted was naturally the Eye of Eternal Night that he had just swallowed. This was probably what it meant to say that disaster comes from a mouth. Before, the Dark Ruler had said that he had coveted the Eye of Eternal Night for a long time and wanted to use swallowing it as a turning point to break out of his shackles. In fact, if one looked at this the other way around, there wasn't a problem. If you wanted to eat me, could it be that you didn't allow me to think about eating you? And to the Eye of Eternal Night, this was clearly a heaven-sent opportunity. The Dark Ruler had been repeatedly wounded and didn't seem to have any strength to resist. Chinyu's eyes exploded with a sharp light. He stepped forwards and rushed forwards. At the same time, he lifted a hand and pointed forwards. Puff! With a dull sound, a massive chunk of the Dark Ruler's chest and abdomen burst apart, turning into a billowing fog of blood that swept outwards. But before it could spread out, it was swallowed up by the pitch black hole. This finger was the combined effect of picking stars and defensive strike. Since Grab the Moon had a shortcut of swallowing the target's soul and rapidly increasing one's strength, picking stars naturally had a similar method. It was just that the target was a powerful flesh and blood. Of course, the restrictions were the same. It was fine to occasionally take a shortcut, but if one took it too often, there would be major problems. Strictly speaking, picking stars to forcefully seize flesh and blood wasn't as sharp and terrifying as Grab the Moon. But the first point was that the shortcut of picking stars was relatively easy to take. It didn't have as strong a restriction as Grab the Moon. Another point was that any supernatural ability or method in the world needed to be adapted to the local conditions. Today, when Grab the Moon was used to forcefully seize flesh and blood, when combined with the terrifying black hole in the Dark Ruler's chest, the power was truly terrifying. In the blink of an eye, the black hole expanded. The flesh and blood that had disappeared had clearly fallen into the eye of Eternal Night's stomach. Chapter 1440. This time, it would be difficult for the Dark Ruler to escape. Yu didn't hesitate. He lifted a hand and thrust out a second finger, wanting to join forces with the Eternal Night, to send the Dark Ruler into the abyss of destruction. But at this time, there was a loud roar. The Dark Ruler lifted a hand and smashed it against his chest, actually tearing his body in half. Through this method, he forcefully cut off the swallowing force of the Eternal Night Eye. Discarding the lower half of his body, the Dark Ruler only dragged his head and chest above. He roared and punched space, flying straight in. Without the support of the Dark Ruler's will, the lower half of his body was instantly swallowed up by the Eternal Night Eye. The darkness around him became even deeper. Shwa, a single eye appeared on the surface of the bead. It looked at Yu, and intense fluctuations of thoughts echoed out in his mind. After you recover from your injuries, chase after my aura and arrive in the world of darkness as soon as possible. With a tremor, the Eternal Night Eye vanished from sight. It had clearly gone to chase after the fleeing Dark Ruler. Yu took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the killing intent in his heart. Since the Eternal Night I had asked him to recover from his injuries before going, there must be a reason for it. Although he had severely wounded the Dark Ruler and even lost half of his body, he was still a formidable existence in the world of darkness that could compare with a ruler. So, if he wanted to kill him, he couldn't delay for too long. Otherwise, he might have some method to recover from his injuries. Thinking of this, Yu felt a sense of urgency. But no matter how urgent it was, he had to first deal with the matters in front of him. Shwa, Yu's figure flickered. He flew back to the Heavenly Sword Sect. With a sweep of his divine sense, he discovered Ling Zhao's aura. His luck was quite good. Although he had been implicated and injured, it wasn't a big problem. With a flick of his sleeves, the mess was swept away to reveal Ling Zhao. As he saw Yu, he revealed a look of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Ninth." Although he hadn't personally witnessed what happened today, he had sensed the gist of it. Yu lifted a hand and broke apart the shackles on his body. He said, "I still have important matters to attend to, so I cannot stay here for long. I will leave this to you to deal with." As he spoke, there was the sound of breaking air. It was Xianji who had been hiding in the distance. She only dared to reveal herself after seeing the dust settle. "Ninth Lady," she bowed respectfully, her tone full of respect and awe. After witnessing the terrifying might of Yu's attack just now, in Xianji's heart, besides the ruler of the vast Yang world, there was no one more fierce than Mr. Ninth. In fact, even if she were to face the sovereign head-on, Xian Paper didn't believe that Miss Ninth would necessarily lose. Yu nodded. "Xianji, you stay here for the time being to assist Ling Zhao in dealing with the matters of the Heavenspan Sword Sect." After a slight pause, he continued, "Don't worry, something like this will never happen again." This was not a lie. Without accident, the ruler of darkness wouldn't be able to survive this. After killing him and obtaining the crown, he would become the new ruler of the dark world. Although the Eye of Eternal Night hadn't explicitly stated it, this should be his plan. Only with the status of the ruler of darkness would he be able to obtain the chance to enter the western wilderness. At that time, naturally, no one would look into what happened in the world Zeroth land. After obtaining Yu's promise, Xianji relaxed and respectfully nodded. Otherwise, she really wouldn't have dared to stay in the Heavenspan Sword Sect any longer. If someone were to see this, the next one to suffer might be her. Yu lifted a hand to stop Ling Zhao from speaking. "I'll go first." As he finished speaking, he lifted a hand and pulled forwards. Space violently shook and a gate appeared. It was woven from thick peach tree branches. This was the spatial portal of the peach garden. Before this, because he wasn't sure where the Heavenspan Sword sect was, he could only travel through the void outside. Now that Chinyu was here, he was the strongest and clearest coordinate. He could summon the portal and forcefully open a channel to return to the peach garden. Of course, this sort of ultra-long-distance spatial portal had extremely high requirements for one's cultivation and required a corresponding amount of strength to maintain it. But to the current Chinyu, this wasn't anything at all. When the peach garden's portal finished forming, Chinyu pushed it open and stepped inside. After a slight tremor, a strange light flashed in front of him. When the light returned to silence, Chinyu pushed open the door and smoothly returned to the peach garden. The fluctuations of the transmission naturally couldn't be concealed from Bai Feng, who was controlling the barrier of the peach garden, as well as his eldest senior apprentice brother, who had already reached the true saint realm. When Chinyu pushed open the door, the two of them were already waiting outside. As they saw him, they relaxed and revealed happy expressions. The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled and said, "I knew that junior apprentice brother would be fine." As he spoke, he looked Chinyu up and down, and his complexion couldn't help but change. Chinyu knew that the eldest senior apprentice brother had discovered that his great Tao had collapsed. He said, "I'm a bit different from ordinary cultivators. Even if my great Tao is gone, there won't be any fatal consequences. Eldest senior apprentice brother, there is no need to worry." He paused, and then asked, "How is Peach Girl?" The eldest senior apprentice brother said, "Junior apprentice brother, don't worry. After reading the letter you left me, I promptly took action. Junior apprentice sister's condition has stabilized for now." Chinyu relaxed. This was the fundamental reason he had hurried back to the peach garden. He had to first determine that there was nothing wrong with Peach Girl. Thinking for a moment, he said, "Eldest senior apprentice brother, I will soon leave the peach garden. There will be some risks on this trip, so I can only leave Peach Girl to you for now. But, senior apprentice brother, don't worry. Once I return, I will naturally replace you." The eldest senior apprentice brother smiled. "Honorable master's graciousness to me is as heavy as a mountain. It is only natural for me to look after junior apprentice sister." Chinyu cupped his hands together. "Thank you, eldest senior apprentice brother." At the cost of damaging his own great Tao, he had extended Peach Girl's life. The reason the Yar Master had done this was because Peach Girl was his beloved daughter. Chinyu had done this in order to save his Tao companion. He couldn't allow Peach Girl to die. In comparison, the eldest senior apprentice brother's current performance could be said to be of noble character and unquestionable integrity. After all, for a Permitha true saint, the great Tao was the foundation of everything. He couldn't allow it to be damaged in the slightest. Not everyone could make such a decision. Chinyu nodded to Bai Feng and then turned to leave. Time was of the essence. After confirming that Peach Girl was safe, he couldn't delay any longer. As Bai Feng watched him leave, her face filled with disbelief. Eldest senior apprentice brother, his little junior apprentice brother saying that his great Tao no longer exists. Although she had heard it clearly, she still couldn't help but gulp as she repeated it. She felt that this world was far too absurd. The eldest senior apprentice brother coughed. "Little junior apprentice brother has a great secret that is different from us. There is no need for junior apprentice brother to be too shocked." He waved his hand and left. The corners of Bai Feng's lips twitched, and she revealed a stupefied expression. Even his great Tao had collapsed, and yet he was still alive and kicking. If this wasn't shocking, then was there anything else in this world that needed to be shocked? But at this time, Bai Feng didn't see that the eldest senior apprentice brother who had turned around also had a rueful expression on his face. Chinyu returned to the small courtyard. With a few words, he drove away Lei Xiaoyu, who had rushed over. As she pouted in dissatisfaction, he slammed the courtyard doors shut. Great furnace. With a loud shout, Chinyu sat down cross-legged and entered into a state of cultivation. Or, to be more precise, what he was doing now was adjusting his own strength and cooperating with the great furnace to reform his great Tao. The void trembled. The phantom of the great furnace appeared, covering Qin Yu within. In the blink of an eye, 5 days passed. Within the training room, Qin Yu opened his eyes. He had spent far more time than he had imagined. After asking the Great Furnace, he confirmed his suspicions. As he thought, when it came to breaking down and building up, the difficulty had increased. This was the same for Qin Yu. In simpler terms, although it was extremely smooth when he first formed his great Tao, if he broke it once and tried to reform it again, the difficulty would rise by another level, and so on and so forth. Every time the great Tao broke, the difficulty of reforming it would rise. Of course, correspondingly, the quality and strength of the reformed great Tao would also increase. This could be considered a consolation. But Qin Yu was still a bit disappointed. He could only reluctantly suppress the thought of using the Tao-shattering sword as a normal method of attack. It seemed that it was best to do something like breaking one's great Tao as little as possible. If one day it broke and he couldn't reform it again, that would be a big joke. Of course, the more important reason was that as he reformed his great Tao many times, the quality and strength of his great Tao would constantly increase, and his connection with Qin Yu would become increasingly close. In other words, Qin Yu would have to pay an even greater price to break his Tao in the future. In the end, he might even end up like an ordinary true saint. His great Tao would collapse, and he would perish. But in the end, this was a matter for the future. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. The injuries within his body were all caused by the collapse of his great Tao. Now that it had been tempered and reformed, all the problems were naturally solved. If news of Qin Yu's great Tao collapsing and then reforming it in a short 5 days his, perhaps all the true saints in the world would instantly turn into rabbit eyes. Leaving the small courtyard, Qin Yu didn't hesitate at all. He lifted his hand and pulled, summoning the Peach Garden's transmission gate. He reached out and pushed it open, then stepped into it. With a slight buzz, the portal disappeared without a trace. Soon, the transmission gate reappeared. When Qin Yu pushed it open, he had already returned to the small world where the Heavenly Sword sect was. The powerful aura released by the transmission gate had already alarmed them. At this time, countless cultivators in the Sword sect widened their eyes, their faces filled with awe and unease. Back then, the Dark World only wanted to use the Heavenly Sword sect as a raft to lure Qin Yu out, so they didn't slaughter him. Or perhaps they wanted to take this chance to subdue him to make up for their losses. In short, although there was bloodshed, there weren't many. When the Peach Garden's transmission gate descended, Ling Xiao, who was talking to the Sword Sect Master, suddenly changed his expression. Mr. Ninth is here. Not daring to delay, he stood up and stepped out. His figure appeared in midair, and he bowed to Qin Yu. Greetings, Mr. Ninth. Xin Paper flew out from somewhere and bowed as well. Qin Yu nodded. His eyes swept over the Heavenly Sword sect. I will be leaving soon. You don't need to worry about me. Saying this, he closed his eyes and began to lock onto the aura of the Eye of Eternal Night. As mentioned before, Qin Yu was someone who had comprehended light and darkness as one. It wasn't difficult for him to identify auras. At this time, Qin Yu suddenly thought of something. With the level of the Eye of Eternal Night, did it really not sense light and darkness as one? Even if it didn't know, as an existence that had once followed the ruler, it must have heard of it or been warned. From this point of view, the matter of the Eye of Eternal Night being swallowed by the ruler of darkness might not have been so simple. It was likely that this had been part of its plan from the very beginning. After all, attacking from inside the enemy's body was much simpler than attacking from the outside. TSK, the Eye of Eternal Night was truly sinister and bold. After all, if it was swallowed into its belly, it could easily die. Qin Yu's thoughts wandered. It wasn't that he had the leisure to think about such things at this time. It was because he couldn't help but feel a bit nervous in his heart. Well, to be honest, Qin Yu was indeed very nervous. After all, he was about to enter the world of darkness. And the world of darkness was the ruler of darkness's home field. What if he was playing tricks and still had a card up his sleeve? If Qin Yu went in now, he would be sending himself to his death with no chance of coming out alive. But now that things had come to this, there was no way to retreat. Otherwise, if the ruler of darkness recovered, he would die without a doubt. Qingyu took a deep breath and suppressed his tumbling thoughts. His eyes brightened. Found it. The aura left behind by the Eye of Eternal Night immediately reacted after being touched. In front of Qingyu, a black vortex suddenly appeared. It was incomparably dark, as if it connected to an endless abyss. Qingyu clenched his teeth and stepped in. His figure and the vortex disappeared at the same time. This scene fell into the eyes of Ling, Xiao, and Xianji. After personally experiencing that heaven-shaking battle several days ago, the two of them could certainly guess what Qingyu was doing. As they glanced at each other, they could feel the tumultuous emotions surging in each other's hearts. Mr. Ninth was truly a peak character in this world. Even when facing the tyrannical ruler of darkness, he still dared to think of exterminating him. And most importantly, in just a few days, Mr. Ninth's aura had returned to its peak and was even stronger than before. Such methods were naturally worthy of admiration and praise. If Ling Xiao and Xianji, who worshipped Mr. Ninth in their hearts, were to know that the incomparably majestic peach garden Mr. Ninth in their eyes had been panic-stricken just a moment ago, they would likely be left dumbfounded. Schwa, space flashed, and the half-saint heavenly sword sect master appeared. As he looked at the direction where the black vortex disappeared, he revealed a look of gratitude and respect. "This is the peach garden, Mr. Ninth?" Ling Xiao nodded. Reporting to sect master, "It is indeed, Mr. Ninth." The sword master revealed a look of praise. He smiled and said, "He really is a first-class character in this world. Just the appearance of a divine dragon causes one to yearn for him." He paused for a moment and said, "Unfortunately, Mr. Ninth came and left in a hurry and couldn't thank him in person, but when I looked at that black vortex just now, it seemed ominous." Mr. Ninth is going. He looked at Ling Xiao, a puzzled look on his face. Ling Xiao hesitated for a moment. He thought that this matter wasn't much of a secret, and since Mr. Ninth had appeared in front of everyone, he shouldn't be afraid of others finding out. He allowed a light breath and lowered his voice. "I told Sect Master before that the ruler of darkness was defeated and escaped. Today, Mr. Ninth should be descending into the world of darkness." The Sword Master's eyes widened and the praise on his face froze. With the Heavenly Sword Sect's background, he certainly knew a little about the existence of the world of darkness. Towards the mysterious and incomparably powerful ruler of darkness, he felt a deep awe in his heart. To be able to wound him and force him back was already an unbelievable feat. So how could he dare to break into his lair and cut the weeds by the roots? It had to be known that the ruler of darkness resided in the world of darkness and had a comprehensive increase in strength attribute. If Qingyu were to be defeated and lose his life, wouldn't their heavenly sword sect soon be finished? Chapter 1441. Ling Xiao glanced at the paper and saw that she was looking elsewhere, as if she didn't see the sovereign's expression. His heart relaxed a little, and he lightly coughed. "Sovereign, you don't need to worry. What kind of character is Miss Ninth? Her every move is naturally prepared. Nothing will happen." The Sword Master came back to his senses and immediately nodded. "That's right. I've been worrying too much." His face returned to calmness, and a smile reappeared on his face, but the worry in his heart was still there. After all, this was the world of darkness, and the one Qingyu wanted to kill was the incomparably powerful ruler of darkness. Xianji lightly smiled as he bowed. "Senior Sword Master, Senior Brother Ling Xiao, the affairs of the Sword Sect are basically on the right track now. I still have some matters that I need to report to Master, so I won't stay here for long. Farewell." After saying that, she bowed to the two of them and turned to leave, a hint of disdain at the corner of her mouth. She thought that the Heavenly Sword Sect's Swordmaster's eyesight was too poor. It was no wonder that after all these years, he was still stuck at the half-saint level, unable to advance. So what if it was the ruler of darkness? Even if it was the real Juggernaut, Miss Ninth might not necessarily be a match for him. Since Mr. Ninth had made a move today, that dark ruler likely didn't have much time left. That's right, Xianji had full confidence in Qinyu. Even Qinyu didn't know that he now had an incomparably loyal and fanatical fan. Disregarding this side, the sword master's smile had already collapsed. He had a dignified expression as he pulled on Ling Xiao. With a bitter smile, he began to discuss the migration of the sect. On the other side, Qinyu stepped into the black vortex. After a relatively stable transmission, he smoothly arrived in the dark world. The first thought that came to his mind was that this place really lived up to its name. It was truly pitch black, and everything was shrouded by the endless curtain of night. Fortunately, the Tao of Darkness was within the scope of Qinyu's abilities, so he didn't feel too uncomfortable. A gust of wind blew across the plains, swirling up tiny grains of sand. These grains of sand collided with one's body and fell back down, emitting a soft walala sound. This was an extremely normal occurrence. As a plain without any vegetation, it was only natural for the wind to sweep up mud and dust. But at this time, Qinyu frowned. He reached out a hand in front of him and caught the grains of sand that smashed into him. He gently twirled his fingers, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes, as if he could sense something else from these tiny grains of sand. The world of darkness is really unusual. Qinyu sighed and let go of the sand between his fingers. Then he stepped forward and turned his back to the wind. A gust of wind blew from behind him, causing his robe to flutter in the wind. He gave off a carefree aura, as if he was an immortal who was riding the wind. Coupled with his current appearance and the somewhat otherworldly aura that naturally emanated from his body after the condensation of the Great Tao, he was truly extraordinary. Unfortunately, in this dark world, there wasn't a single ghost to be seen. Naturally, there was no qualified audience that could properly serve as a foil to Qin Yu's current elegance. The reason he didn't determine the direction and hurried on his way was because the wind and the grains of sand that were swept up had already given him the answer. As he moved forwards, there was only the sound of the wind. A steady stream of sand was swept up from the ground. A portion of it didn't fly too far before falling back down. As for the other portion, it was lifted up by the wind and flew into the pitch-black sky. It was constantly pushed by the endless wind as it flew deep into the plains. As Qinyu moved forwards, he inevitably experienced the warm baptism of the falling grains of sand above his head. He had no choice but to summon a mass of darkness aura to isolate it outside. Otherwise, before he reached his destination, he would turn into a clay man. In all fairness, at such a critical moment, and with a great battle about to occur, wasting any strength at all was extremely stupid. But the grains of sand here weren't ordinary. Qinyu had to admit that he didn't have the good fortune to enjoy them. If he were to be covered by them, he feared he really would turn into a clay man that would shatter at the slightest touch. He continued forwards and forwards. A long time had already passed. The plains beneath his feet were astonishingly large, but Qinyu still didn't have any intention of flying. Besides this, there was one more thing. He had already been here for some time, but he hadn't encountered anyone along the way. The world of darkness wasn't a danger zone. Rather, it was the frontmost fortress of the western wilderness. By all reasoning, there should be many powerhouses gathered here. Since the Dark Ruler had escaped, with his status, he could easily gather a group of cultivators. While he might not be able to stop Qinyu, he could at least form several defensive lines to slow down his advance and consume as much of his strength as possible in order to increase his chances of survival. But there was nothing. It was abnormally quiet. Qinyu furrowed his eyebrows. After several breaths of time, he slowly composed himself. It had already been said before that with the situation having reached this step, the only choice was to completely crush the Dark Ruler and have him receive his bento box. So, even if there was something strange about this place, Qin, you could only continue forwards. Moreover, the Eye of Eternal Night was still in front of him. If Qinyu didn't go, wouldn't that be the same as selling it? He couldn't see his own fingers in front of him, but that didn't mean he couldn't see anything. On the contrary, because he had grasped the path of darkness. Everything here was within the range of Qin Yu's perception. So, when that ring-shaped mountain appeared on the distant horizon, Qin Yu immediately discovered it. Then he saw the clean and tidy hall that was surrounded by it. The grains of sand that fell from the sky all fell onto the ring-shaped mountain, becoming a part of it. But not a single grain touched the hall. There seemed to be an invisible barrier between the two sides, separating them. Qin Yu let out a breath. But he didn't relax at all. Without a doubt, this was where his goal was. So, if the Dark Ruler wanted to do something, this would be his final chance. Did he really not do anything? Or could it be said that the Eye of Eternal Night had chased him here and suppressed him to the point where he couldn't make any more arrangements? But in truth, Qin Yu didn't favor either of these possibilities. This was because the other party was the Dark Ruler, the highest ruler of this world. In this place, he was a formidable existence comparable to the vast Sun Ruler. After letting out a breath, in order to maintain balance, he naturally had to take another. This wasn't nonsense, but continued the progression of the story. This was because the moment Qin Yu took a deep breath, an icy chill suddenly appeared, spreading outwards like a tide. The extreme cold aura seemed to come from an ancient cave of ice, but also as if it came from the Nine Hells. It instantly froze his flesh and blood, extending towards his soul. Qin Yu's consciousness blurred for a moment. The cry of a sword rang out in his ears, clear and bright, cold and sharp, instantly cutting apart this stagnation. Qin Yu's blurred consciousness instantly awakened. He stuffily coughed, and the heart in his chest violently beat. With loud, cracking sounds, the layer of ice covering his body cracked apart and fell to the ground. His eyes turned cold, and a thick, killing intent erupted, surging like a tide. But deep in his heart, he was filled with alarm and anger. Just a moment ago, his mind had been tense, and he was in a state of extreme vigilance. But who would have thought that a single breath of air would cause such terrifying consequences? If it weren't for the sword of the EC attacking just now, using its invisible sword intent to cut apart the ice that imprisoned Qin Yu's soul, then he feared he would have been tricked and turned into an ice sculpture. Perhaps he wouldn't have been killed so easily, but the consequences wouldn't have been pleasant. The Darkness Ruler's methods were truly sharp and terrifying. If he didn't move, then he wouldn't move. But if he did move, then he would take his life. And it was clear that this was only the beginning. Because as Qin Yu struggled free from the extreme cold, the ground in front of him began to break apart. It didn't crack or collapse, but rather it was being torn apart from the inside out. Then from these holes, a massive number of figures drilled out. Massive wasn't an exaggeration at all. This was because there were far too many people. There was no end to them at a glance. And to be more precise, this wasn't too appropriate either. This was because all of these figures that drilled out from the ground in front of Qin Yu were already corpses. Each and every one of them had pale skin and crimson eyes. There was also a black fog that lingered around them like burning flames. These were puppets. They had been refined with the power of darkness and had become mindless killing tools. Whether or not they were strong depended on the strength of the refiner, as well as the puppet's own cultivation. With the Darkness Ruler's formidable strength and his formidable cultivation in the path of darkness, the level at which he refined these puppets could be imagined. But of these puppets in front of him, although there were some with tyrannical auras, most of them weren't anything special. At the very least, in Qin Yu's eyes, they were at most at the level of cannon fodder. If they rushed at him like a hive of bees, they would only be able to slow him down a little and consume some of his strength. These words seemed a bit familiar, Qin Yu frowned. A trace of loathing and coldness flashed in his eyes. He had already realized why he hadn't seen a single living person on the way here. He swept his eyes around. If he wasn't mistaken, they should all be here. This Darkness Ruler, in order to increase his chances of survival, his heart was quite vicious. Although it was understandable for ants to do anything in order to ensure their own survival, in Qin Yu's eyes, this was still a bit excessive. At the very least, it exceeded Qin Yu's bottom line. So, His eyes turned even colder, and his killing intent thickened. Roar! With a loud roar, a dark puppet rushed forwards like a bolt of lightning. Its speed was astonishing, and its aura was terrifying. Qin Yu's eyebrows arched up, a dignified look in his eyes. This puppet was actually a saint when it was alive. That's right, it wasn't a half-saint struggling in the sea of bitterness, but a giant existence that had reached the other shore and successfully condensed its own great Tao. Although Qin Yu had personally witnessed just how tyrannical the darkness ruler was, he still found it hard to believe that he could actually refine a true saint into a puppet of darkness. This was a puppet of darkness. After all, in Qin Yu's opinion, even a darkness ruler would find it difficult to accomplish this, to the point where a true saint wouldn't even have the chance to commit suicide. Although he couldn't figure it out, he still had to do it. Qin Yu stepped forwards and lifted a hand. Where his fingertip fell, a speck of light appeared. Then, like a great sun leaping out from the vast sea, it released a radiant light. This light was like an arrow that was pulled taut like a full moon as it shot out, piercing into the eyes of all the dark puppets. Some of the weaker dark puppets were struck by this arrow of light. They cried out miserably, and their bodies seemed to boil over, billowing black smoke rising from them. Then, their bodies began to rapidly decay, turning into broken bones and flesh that fell to the ground. They were actually killed on the spot. The true saint-level dark puppet that rushed towards Qin Yu bore the brunt of the arrow of light's killing power. With a stuffy cough, the surface of its body began to burn. But soon, light broke out from the flames, condensing into a suit of armor of light that covered its entire body. Qin Yu revealed a look of surprise. The scene in front of him was beyond his expectations. It caused him to have an even higher opinion of the darkness ruler's level and abilities. Disregarding whether or not his character was ruthless, in terms of the fusion of light and darkness, this darkness ruler had truly reached the peak of perfection. It was even possible that he was stronger than a darkness ruler, and Qin Yu was naturally unable to compare with him. This was because the dark puppet in front of him walked the path of light and was a tyrannical character that had become a true saint. To use the light ruler as a material to refine a dark puppet and to even harmonize the two strengths, just this point alone was admirable. Moreover, the dark puppet in front of him clearly wasn't limited to just this. The fusion of light and darkness within its body was pushing against each other, causing its strength to become even stronger. Qin Yu frowned. He drew back a finger, clenched his fingers into a fist, and punched forwards. Dong! There was a deep and dull sound, as if his fist had struck an invisible wall. Ripples immediately spread outwards. These ripples didn't seem strong, but they contained an astonishing, imprisoning strength. It was like a thick and viscous swamp vortex. After capturing its prey, it would begin to bind it in layers, locking it in. The true saint-level dark puppet angrily roared. A wild strength erupted from its body. Black lines began to appear on the surface of the armor of light. The power of light and darkness activated. The imprisoning strength that came from the shaking space was forcefully broken apart. But Qin Yu's expression remained calm. In the end, an inanimate object was still an inanimate object. Even though this true saint-level dark puppet possessed formidable strength, it didn't know how to advance or retreat, so it wasn't difficult to deal with it. For instance, although it seemed as if it had broken through Qin Yu's imprisonment, this tyrannical and ruthless method would cause considerable damage to itself because of the powerful shockwaves. As a result, a series of cracks suddenly appeared on the surface of the armor covering the dark puppet's body, accompanied by a series of light cracking sounds. And these cracks were what Qin Yu needed. No matter how solid existence was, as long as it was damaged, there would be a chance for it to be destroyed from the inside. He lifted a hand and pointed forwards. But this time, light surged on Qin Yu's fingertip. This was black and white weaving together, giving off an extremely mystical feeling. The place where his fingertip fell was the true saint-level dark puppet. The armor on its body had broken apart, meaning that a flaw had appeared in the harmonious coexistence of light and darkness, and it was no longer able to circulate freely. This gave Chinyu a chance. He had already mentioned the drawbacks of inanimate objects before, so he wouldn't repeat them here. Moreover, he didn't want to use this to destroy the true, saint-level dark puppet in front of him. All he wanted to do was slightly shake the balance of light and darkness within its body and cause an explosion from the inside out. This wasn't difficult at all. The rapidly rushing true, saint-level dark puppet suddenly staggered. There was a dull, thumping sound from its chest, like a thunderclap exploding on the ground. Kacha! Kacha! More cracks spread out from its chest in all directions, covering the entire upper body of its armor of light. This formidable dark puppet's formidable defensive capabilities had now weakened to the extreme. Chinyu could continue attacking, using the same method to weaken it further. But there was no more time. He wouldn't give this dark puppet a chance to approach him. This was because Chinyu was worried that with the cruel and merciless nature of the darkness ruler, he would order the puppet to self-destruct in order to survive. This was a true saint-level dark puppet that was in a coexistent state of light and darkness. If it really did self-destruct near him, Chinyu wouldn't be able to escape unscathed. When it was time to attack, he would attack. Chinyu let out a deep breath. As he stepped forwards, he punched out. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.